So, dear colleagues, please take your seats. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the third session of our conference, where we will delve into the topic of respect for all, protecting minorities and people affected by conflict. As we gather here today, we find ourselves confronted with the harsh reality that millions of people within the OSCE region, particularly those living in conflict zones, are denied their basic rights and freedoms. We must recognize, dear colleagues, the gravity of this situation. Across conflict zones worldwide, including our region, millions of innocent lives are being disrupted, with many facing displacement, violence, and deprivation of their fundamental rights. The statistics are staggering, emphasizing the need for collective responses. In Ukraine, more than 27,000 innocent civilians have been killed or severely injured since the February 22 invasion perpetrated by the Russian Federation. Moreover, there are over 6.2 million forcible displaced Ukrainians globally, including 5.8 million in Europe alone. The United Nations has documented a range of atrocities, including unlawful killings, sexual violence, enforced disappearances, torture, and the deportation of children. These horrifying realities alone underscore the urgency of our discussion today. In armed conflict, which we are tragically witnessing within the OSCE region and beyond, international humanitarian law must be upheld. Too often, civilians are the principal victims of armed conflicts, losing their lives, being forced to flee their homes, and becoming victims of physical and sexual violence. As we have repeatedly called for in our Vancouver Declaration, it is imperative to abide by the core principles of international humanitarian law to ensure that we protect people and limit and prevent human suffering. As we are gathered in Yerevan, we also need to stress the humanitarian consequences of the escalation of hostilities last September in the Karabakh region of Azerbaijan, which has caused over 100,000 persons to flee to Armenia in less than 1 week. This is a huge number for such a small country. The Armenian authorities are doing their best, but they need additional support to integrate this large community. We also need to ensure the right to return, even if it's only temporarily, to collect belongings, for instance. And last but not least, to guarantee the safety and the protection of the rights of those who wish to live in Karabakh. This brings us to the other part of this session's theme, protecting minorities. In our recent Vancouver Declaration, dear colleagues, we also recognize the special vulnerabilities of minorities, and we committed to prioritize their protection. We acknowledged the need for a more inclusive and extensive system of minority protection, not only to ensure the upholding of the rights of everyone without discrimination, but the stability of the OSCE region. Unfortunately, the persecution of minorities remains a reality in many of our countries and a cause of rising tensions within and between states. We need to stand up now more than ever for the rights of minorities as a key component for the realization of human security. The Office of the OSCE High Commissioner and National Minorities has developed a comprehensive set of guidelines on how to address ethnic diversity within and beyond the borders of the state. Undoubtedly, the challenges before us are immense. However, I firmly believe that our collective determination and political will can make a difference. As we engage in thoughtful dialogue and exchange ideas today, let us keep in mind the individuals whose lives have been affected by conflict and those who endure discrimination based on their personal characteristics. I encourage each one of you to approach our discussions today with empathy, compassion, and a shared commitment to finding effective solutions. Together, let us uphold the value of respect for all, starting with those who are the most vulnerable. Thank you for your attention, and let us begin our deliberations. I am pleased to give the floor to two eminent speakers who are well placed to lead and contribute to our discussions. I kindly request each speaker to limit their remarks to a maximum of 7 to 8 minutes to ensure effective time management for the subsequent discussion. It is an honor for me to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Fernand de Varenne, who will join us online today. Dr. de Varenne served as UN Special Rapporteur on minority issues from 2017 until the 1st of November of this year. Dr. de Varenne is a distinguished scholar and practitioner in the field of human rights, with a notable focus on the rights of minorities, as well as the prevention of ethnic conflicts, the rights of migrants, and the use of federalism and other forms of autonomy arrangements. With over 20 years of teaching experience in prestigious universities worldwide, he currently serves as a visiting professor at the Lyon Catholic University, the University of Sarajevo, and the National University of Ireland in Galway. In addition to his outstanding academic career, Dr. de Varenne has actively contributed to policy development in the sector of minority protection, including the drafting of a number of recommendations by the Office of the OSCE High Commissioner on National Minorities. Welcome, Dr. de Varenne, and thank you for joining us today. Your wealth and knowledge and experience promises to enrich and inform our discussion. Dr. de Varenne, please, you have the floor.
Many thanks, Vice President Direda. Mesdames et Messieurs, Excellences, distingués délégués, invités et participants. With this last session on the OSCE in times of crisis, I think we need to acknowledge the exceptional nature and scale of the crisis in the plural sense, because there are more than one that the world and Europe are facing. Let's be honest, and by acknowledging that the world is a darker, more dangerous, and unstable place than it has probably been for close to a century. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres recognized earlier this year that we now have more violent conflicts than at any time since at least 1945. Violent conflicts have about tripled in the last 30 years, and most of these are internal, domestic conflicts, and most of those involve grievances of exclusion, discrimination, or injustice, usually involving minorities, not always, but usually. This is also a leading factor to the largest number of displaced people in human history. It's a staggering amount. More than 110 million individuals worldwide, probably the double of number of displaced people in the Second World War. Around 85% of these displacements are directly linked to violent conflicts. And again, it must be emphasized that most of these occur or involve dividing lines of religion, ethnicity, or language, and grievances of discrimination or exclusion quite often. Think of what are the consequences of the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh that was mentioned earlier. But there's also Darfur, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Yemen, Syria, Ukraine, and Gaza. Think of the consequences both as migration pressures on the borders of the OSCE, as well as to the civilian and humanitarian tragedies on your doorsteps. All of these, I'm afraid, show also the limits to asserting international human rights law, and limits even on how effectively the international community can protect people who are affected by conflicts, including minorities. We also had, finishing next year, a UNHCR campaign to eliminate, to actually end statelessness by 2024, which has essentially failed. The number of persons without citizenship has not been eradicated. It has not even been reduced. It is increasing, with the potential of millions more, mainly minorities, by the way, becoming stateless because of discriminatory state laws and policies, again adding pressures and tensions inside states and on the borders of others. Let me bring to your attention specifically two dimensions that might be overlooked with most of what I've just described. First, minorities are overwhelmingly affected or involved in conflicts and displaced populations and so on. Secondly, there are no national borders which will be immune from the pressures of population movements that are largely driven by conflict and despair, and which will actually be affecting everyone's borders. Minorities disproportionately are among those pushed by wars and violent conflicts. This is going to be further exacerbated by growing economic inequality and even environmental disasters, unless we actually start to address many of these more directly, and particularly conflict prevention. Conflict prevention, if we want to protect minorities and people affected, is key. It has to become front of the OSCE efforts, and I would add to the efforts of all international organizations, including the United Nations, in order to effectively try to protect everyone, and especially civilian populations, from the almost unavoidable atrocities connected with conflict. So let me repeat, if it's not clear enough. The international community has failed, as in no other time since the Second World War, to prevent conflicts. And this is leading to massive historical levels of displacement and pressure on national borders, as well as humanitarian crisis and atrocities, which we are unable to address effectively, as we are seeing in the case of Gaza right now. Countries neighboring to Europe, such as Turkey, will not always, nor as tightly, control the tsunami of human misery and suffering from reaching European borders. And there's also one other crisis which I think we need to mention very quickly, and that's the rise of hate speech and hate crimes propelled by social media. We are seeing record levels of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-Black, anti-Russian, anti-Asian, xenophobia, and intolerance, with social media becoming platforms for the spread of dehumanizing language, usually, by the way, overwhelmingly targeting minorities, quite often minority women in different contexts, but also normalizing violence. And this is creating a poisoning of the mind that is polarizing, dividing, and even destabilizing societies, and directly contributing, again, to unstable contexts which can add fuel to more potential conflicts. So the risks of atrocities, war crimes, humanitarian catastrophes, and even genocide have never been higher in recent history. Partially, perhaps even to a great extent, because we, the international community, global and regional organizations, have not sufficiently focused efforts and attention where it is most needed. Preventing conflicts, which usually involve groups that feel that they are subjected to exclusion or have various grievances. There is the first ever joint report by the United Nations and the World Bank in 2017 called Pathways to Peace, warned that central to many, perhaps even most conflicts around the world are in fact grievances, discrimination, and exclusion around the massive and grave denial of the rights of hundreds of thousands and even millions of people who are mainly, too often, minorities. And that this us versus them paradigm, mixed in with feelings of injustice, combined with perceived discrimination, are re-emerging even more strongly as potent factors of division along ethnic, religious, or linguistic lines, rather than inclusive societies, which we should have in European and other societies. So we really just have to look at what is happening around us. Also with the return of nationalism and its darker exclusionary elements, as are tensions in different parts of Europe, and the instrumentalization of minority grievances for political gains and other objectives, as we well know. So to conclude, the best form of protection is prevention, because the world is unable to provide protection to the growing millions of desperate individuals, refugees, and others trying to avoid atrocities. So perhaps also one last comment. 30 years ago, this was the direction and significant efforts undertaken during the last great period of dramatic political upheavals and conflicts in Europe in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Remember the period of the conflict in Bosnia, the eruption of the former Yugoslavia, and the fall of the Soviet Union. This period of conflicts and tensions led to the adoption of instruments and mechanisms such as the Council of Europe's Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities, the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Persons Belonging to Minorities, but also the creation of the mandate of the OSCE High Commissioner on National Minorities as a conflict prevention tool, and in 1993, to the adoption of the Copenhagen membership for a country to join the European Union, which included stability of institutions, guaranteeing democracy, the rule of law, human rights, but also centrally respect for and protection of minorities. Unfortunately, over the years, most of these commitments have, well, if not ignored, sometimes perhaps even undermined. And in a sense, they have not been able to respond as effectively as was necessary. So it is probably no accident that we are now in a far worse context than even 30 years ago. And this is where are to be found the most fundamental threats to peace, stability, and security: injustice, exclusion, and human despair. And to address these is the key to protecting minorities and their human rights more strongly and centrally in order to have efforts to prevent conflicts, which are absolutely central here. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. de Varenne, for your contribution. We now turn to the remarks from the next speaker sitting next to me, Mr. Yerishe Kirakosian. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Representative on international legal issues at the Office of the Prime Minister, of the Republic of Armenia. Mr. Kyriakosyan worked many years as a legal advisor before serving as Deputy Minister of Justice from 2012 to 2014. In 2018, he was appointed advisor to the Prime Minister, and in 2019, representative of the Republic of Armenia to the European Court of Human Rights. Mr. Kyriakosyan, allow me to again express the OSCE EPA's appreciation for the hospitality that Armenia has shown in hosting our meeting. We look forward to hearing your input. Please take the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction, for the kind words, and this is truly an honor to address the parliamentary conference here in Yerevan of the OSCE EPA. And I think this is a very important opportunity and forum also for discussing important issues that are current and concern of the international community as a whole, including Armenia. And maybe I will start from the Armenian perspective of trying to present what Armenia has been going through in the past couple of years in terms of engaging different international legal mechanisms. And I will be speaking from my competence and capacity, as I've been doing. As you mentioned in your presentation, I'm representing the Republic of Armenia before international courts, including European Court of Human Rights, International Court of Justice, and other international legal proceedings, including arbitrations. But I think in this context, as we have gathered today, it's more relevant to speak about the proceedings that Armenia has before the European Court of Human Rights and the International Court of Justice, because they're directly relevant to the topic that is being discussed today, specifically protecting minorities and peoples affected by conflict. And that's exactly what Armenia has been envisaging to do since the beginning of the conflict, I mean the war, back in 2020 fall, and when Azerbaijan launched aggressive war against Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia, and we faced the really grave realities of the human suffering, torture, human treatment, capture and forced disappearances, missing persons, captives, and civilians dying, and people, tens of thousands of people being deprived of their homes. Even now, as we speak, just over a month ago, we had the mass forcible displacement of Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh into Armenia. So all those realities that Armenia lives through in the past 3 years have prompted Armenia to be very active in regard of using international legal mechanisms. And in particular, Armenia has been very actively bringing cases against Azerbaijan in the European Court of Human Rights. Specifically, we have 4 interstate applications which are relating to different instances of violation of human rights, including the rights of the minorities and different types of rights, right to property, right to life, freedom from torture and inhuman treatment, and also right to liberty, and many other forms of right that are listed in the European Convention of Human Rights. And maybe I think I will continue with the remarks of the previous speaker, I think, with regard to the roots of the conflict and the problem of not being able to prevent conflict, which I agree maybe in the past 3 years, not only Armenia has been through these challenges, but I think it has been challenging for the entire planet, because we have many conflicts erupting in different spots of the globe, and frozen conflict exploding, and in the European continent, in elsewhere, and this is very worrying, of course, for us. Of course, that puts the international legal order to test, to see what the international legal order can do to deal with these conflicts. But I agree with the previous speaker that the problem is that we need, important thing is that the international legal order is more structured to prevent those conflicts, not to deal with the active conflict. But if we're dealing with the active conflicts, it's much, much harder and difficult. And one of the points that I take from previous speakers' presentation is the hate speech, the animosity and hatred that is being spewed through the social media. And that's for us too is one of the causes of the conflict and root causes of the conflict that we have. And this is very worrying because that's why Armenia has initiated a case at the ICJ, International Court of Justice, based on the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. This is a key convention which prohibits the policies of racial discrimination, racial animosity towards specific groups, including ethnic groups, for example. And what we faced in the past years, I think it is specifically the result of this decades-long animosity and hate propaganda, including by the political leadership of the country, I mean Azerbaijan, and that's the very sad reality that we live in. And the cases that Armenia has brought before the International Court of Justice resulted in several interior provisional measures orders that were issued by the court. Specifically, the first one was issued by the court back in December 2021, which was relating to the cessation and relating to ending the hate propaganda and hate speech by the public authorities of Azerbaijan, and relating to the preservation of the rights of the ethnic Armenians that are under the control in Azerbaijan, and also preservation of the cultural property and monuments, Armenian cultural property monuments in Nagorno-Karabakh under the control of Azerbaijan. So later on we had, of course, cases relating to, in terms of provisional measure applications relating to the blockade of the Lachin corridor, as you may know. And that's one of the other later unfortunate developments that we had, blocking by blocking of the Lachin corridor, blocking the more than 100,000 people from the livelihood and food, drugs, and medicine that are necessary for the survival, and which, of course, then unfortunately resulted into ethnic cleansing. And I think all this, and by the way, just days ago, I just returned from The Hague, where I was present at the hearing of the International Court of Justice, which delivered its order in relating to a request by the Republic of Armenia, which relates to the events of forcible displacement of ethnic Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh in September this year. And the court specifically ordered very important measures relating to right to return of the ethnic Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh. And the court actually specifically recognized the obligation of Azerbaijan to ensure that persons who have left Nagorno-Karabakh after 19 September 2023 who wish to return to Nagorno-Karabakh are able to do so in safe, unimpeded, and expeditious manner. And there are many other measures that the court indicated, importantly, for example, or ensure the persons who remained in Nagorno-Karabakh after 19 September who wish to depart able to do so, and also ensure that persons who remained in Nagorno-Karabakh after September or returned to Nagorno-Karabakh who wish to stay are free from use of force, intimidation that may cause them to flee. And the courts actually issued this, and the court actually also obliged Azerbaijan to present a report to the court in 8 weeks, which should be in January. And I think this is an important development that the members also the present here should maybe know about that, and why Armenia is bringing also these cases and proceedings to the international courts. I think it's very simple because we are appealing to the international courts, which is a pure and streamlined process of evidentiary finding, meaning that the countries usually, when they are presenting some facts or evidentiary materials, they tend to present from their own perspective. Mm-hmm. But when you go to court, when you present your evidence and positioning to the court, and you listen the other side's opposition to it, and you get the decision or judgment, which is the objective reality. And that's important in this regard. And Armenia and the ICJ already has issued 3 interim measure decisions applying provisional measures, and I'm not speaking about the European Court of Human Rights. And we think that this is the way, and also if we are thinking in terms of peace, that's important to highlight that I think these proceedings, these legal proceedings, are also intended to lead to peace, because those international legal proceedings are nothing more than peaceful means of settlement of disputes. And yeah, I'm sorry, but this is important highlight. Maybe I'll stop here. If there will be any questions, I'll be happy to reply. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kyriakosian. Dear colleagues, I now look forward to hearing from you. I have already noted a number of names on the speakers list, but would encourage you to please come up as soon as possible and let us know if you wish to intervene with some questions concerning the speaks of our distinguished guests. This is the best to enable me to manage the time. I kindly ask you to limit your interventions to 3 minutes so that we may give the floor to everyone who has requested it. The first speaker on my list is Pere John Pons from Spain, followed by Lucy Potuchkova from the Czech Republic. So please, Pere, the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Chair, and thank you to the speakers, to Monsieur de Varenne, and also to the representative of the government of Armenia. And if you don't mind, I'm going to change to my language, to Spanish. And la primera pregunta que se me ha puesto es, ¿y nosotros qué podemos hacer, ¿no?, como parlamentarios? Y he intentado responder como testimonio y catalizar cambio. Entonces, a nivel de lo que ha dicho el representante de Armenia, ¿qué podemos hacer, por ejemplo, nosotros parlamentarios? Nosotros el 17 de octubre, en las Cortes Generales de España, hemos aprobado una resolución en la que condenamos el ataque de Azerbaiyán y también le recordamos a Azerbaiyán que han firmado una convención para la prevención del genocidio y que tienen responsabilidades en relación al derecho internacional. Y lo ligo con lo que ha dicho el señor de Varenne en relación a Gaza y a Israel. En primer lugar, volveré a repetir que nosotros tenemos una fuerte solidaridad con Israel, con el pueblo de Israel y el deber de humanidad y solidaridad, pero el derecho a la legítima defensa no es un derecho que se pueda extralimitar, hay unas responsabilidades y, por tanto, ¿qué podemos hacer? Y nosotros, como parlamentarios, debemos recordarle a Israel que se tiene que respetar el derecho internacional, que hay un derecho humanitario que se debe respetar con 4 convenciones de Ginebra y que no respetar la asistencia humanitaria de urgencia supone no respetar un derecho que todos debemos cumplir y que además roza, como ha dicho el señor Ocampo, con algunas posibles formas de genocidio. Pero es que además creo que tenemos que ser valientes y yo quiero aquí decir que hay que cesar esas hostilidades, también hay que tener un plan de paz, tenemos que presentar un plan de paz y, por supuesto, como se dijo esta semana en el Parlamento español por el nuevo presidente, tenemos que ser capaces de reconocer el Estado palestino y, además, como dijo Dominique de Villepin, será la única posibilidad de que haya seguridad en la región. Pero quería añadir algunas cosas más que se han dicho. Me ha gustado mucho lo que ha dicho el señor de Barén sobre el fracaso de la comunidad internacional. Efectivamente, es un fracaso de la comunidad internacional. Me gustaría decir que cada vez lo que está sucediendo en Gaza se parece más a la doctrina Grozny. Lo hemos visto en Alepo, lo vimos en Grozny, y la verdad es que entristece profundamente, y como ayer expresó muy bien la diputada de Irlanda, es sinceramente indignante e indigno lo que estamos viendo, ¿no? Y quería preguntarle también al relator sobre esta doble pena de las redes sociales. ¿Cómo hacemos para combatir estos delitos de odio contra las minorías que se están expandiendo de una forma tan profunda en el planeta? Y, por tanto, quería pedirles cómo hacemos para que estos delitos de odio, que también están en el documento del relator de Naciones Unidas, se pueden combatir. Me gustaría pedirles consejos sobre eso. ¿Cómo hacemos para combatir los delitos de odio de todos y de las minorías en especial en las redes? Muchísimas gracias.
So next speaker will be Lucy Potutskova from the Czech Republic, followed by Malik Benashur from Belgium.
Thank you, Madam President, Vice President, sorry. This morning I met with representatives of People in Need, which is the main actor in helping refugees from Nagorno-Karabakh, as well as the coordinator of other helping bodies. It also happens to be one of the best-known Czech NGOs based in Prague. I think that in case of refugee crisis all over the world, it is absolutely crucial not to just follow the official reports from conflicting parties, but to go directly to the field and meet with representatives of organizations that operate in the affected areas. I think that the information that I have received and the challenges that the NGOs have to deal with apply the same in virtually all territories that have become victims of geopolitical conflicts or aggression. Nice words of support are fine, but they do not warm families up, they do not feed children, and they do not help people to heal, both psychologically and physically. It is up to us, the politicians, to listen and to use our contacts and powers and to send signals to our governments and potential donors to set up a legislative framework that would allow humanitarian organizations to carry out their job, or at least to put as few obstacles in their way as possible, especially the bureaucratic ones. This is the least we can do if we cannot help to negotiate peace or a ceasefire. And since I am a practical person, I would like to be very concrete. As for education, if 100,000 refugees from Karabakh are to be fully integrated into society, people need to be able to start working. Mothers must be able to find a job. There is a fundamental lack of preschool facilities in the areas with high concentration of displaced people. It would be very helpful if there was some legislation that would anchor to the so-called children's group, which are more flexible and have fewer qualification requirements. Refugees should be given the most accurate information possible regarding their status. It is the process of applying for refugee status or citizenship, including as detailed information as possible about what they will gain from the status and which benefits they will lose. Even negative information is important to help people cope with their current situation better. A sense of stability and security is a key. Long-term peaceful and friendly coexistence between the refugee community and the existent permanently settled community is both extremely important and very difficult. Donors and contributors of financial assistance have often stipulated in their terms and conditions for granting assistance that it is intended only for refugees. However, local committees should also benefit from the concentration of refugees to avoid jealousy and tensions. It is not possible for the local people to strive for their living and for the refugees to appear to be better off. The situation is widespread and occurs wherever there is a refugee crisis. I would therefore like to conclude by expressing my thanks to all the volunteers, donors, and people who selflessly provided their time and resources to help all people in need. And I also want to thank the government of this beautiful country for hosting this wonderful event.
Thank you, Lucy. Next speaker on the list is Malik Benashour from Belgium, followed by Kyriakos Haidiani from Cyprus. Please, Malik, take the floor.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Je m'exprimerai en français pour vous dire ceci. L'attaque brutale du Hamas a provoqué un traumatisme profond au sein de la société israélienne. Je condamne cette attaque sans ambiguïté et je mesure l'ampleur du traumatisme dans la société israélienne. L'attaque du Hamas est un crime contre l'humanité. Depuis le 7 octobre, quelle est la situation à Gaza? Blocus menant à des risques de famine et d'épidémie. Bombardements indiscriminés et disproportionnés touchant des hôpitaux et des écoles. Déplacements forcés de centaines de milliers de civils, de femmes, d'enfants, de vieillards. Des milliers de civils tués sous les bombes. 70% de ces victimes sont des femmes et des enfants, et le secrétaire général des Nations Unies décrit Gaza comme un cimetière pour enfants et dénonce une punition collective inacceptable. Des dizaines de journalistes sont tués et 100 membres du personnel des Nations Unies ont été tués. 100 membres du personnel des Nations Unies. Chers collègues, pensez à ceci. Quel genre de réaction susciterait ce genre de situation n'importe où ailleurs dans le monde? Et pourtant, beaucoup de capitales occidentales continuent de donner un brevet d'impunité à Israël pour mener ces actions en ne comprenant pas qu'un crime n'efface jamais un autre crime. L'incapacité manifeste du gouvernement israélien et de son armée à limiter ses opérations à des cibles militaires légitimes l'a conduit à violer les normes internationales, et ce n'est pas moi qui le dis, ce sont des diplomates américains dans une note qui a été rendue publique. Chers collègues, au moment où je vous parle, Israël se rend coupable de crimes de guerre, probablement de crimes contre l'humanité. Face à cette situation, j'ai deux choses à vous dire. Un, il faut appeler à un cessez-le-feu immédiat, à l'accès à l'aide humanitaire, à la libération des otages et à la libération des Palestiniens détenus arbitrairement, mais il faut aussi tracer des perspectives politiques très claires. La seule garantie de sécurité pour les deux peuples, c'est la paix. Or, il ne peut y avoir de paix sans justice, et entre Palestiniens et Israéliens, il ne peut y avoir de justice sans une remise en question fondamentale des causes profondes de ce conflit que sont l'occupation et la colonisation des territoires palestiniens. Sans un reparamétrage de ce conflit, sans la fin de l'occupation et de la colonisation, les mêmes causes produiront toujours les mêmes conséquences et le Hamas, même détruit, sera remplacé par d'autres. Une solution à deux États est plus que jamais importante. Deuxième élément. Ce deuxième élément, il nous concerne tous. Derrière la guerre de Gaza se trouve un enjeu capital, la crédibilité des valeurs que nous prétendons incarner et leur capacité à nourrir le projet démocratique. Hier, j'ai entendu parler d'une guerre entre le bien et le mal. Hier, j'ai entendu qu'il s'agissait d'un affrontement entre le monde civilisé et le monde non civilisé. Chers collègues, le monde civilisé, la civilisation, c'est la cohérence dans l'application des principes. La civilisation, c'est la primauté du droit sur la force. La civilisation, c'est l'idée que la vie d'un civil vaut la vie d'un autre civil. La civilisation, c'est l'universalité des valeurs. Chers collègues, par nos positionnements sur ce conflit comme sur d'autres, ne laissons pas le paradigme de l'universalisme, issu de la philosophie des Lumières, consacré dans la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme. Ne laissons pas ce paradigme se laisser remplacer par le paradigme identitaire, le paradigme des identités meurtrières qui s'opposent et se détruisent irrémédiablement. Je vais en terminer sur ceci. La logique du double standard est un poison pour la démocratie et affaiblit la parole des démocraties dans le monde. Et je vous signale que la semaine prochaine, c'est en Chine, oui, en Chine, que se rendra le ministre des Affaires étrangères saoudien dans l'espoir de trouver une solution juste et durable à ce conflit. Je vous remercie.
Merci Malik. Next speaker on my list is Kyriakos Haidiani from Cyprus, followed by Dr. Hedy Fry from Canada. Please, Kyriakos, take the floor.
The last 3 years are providing a stress test to our democracies, putting pressures on the resilience of our democratic institutions and processes, and to upholding human rights and fundamental freedoms as enshrined in the Helsinki Final Act. Our region is facing a long period of instability precisely because of the rapid succession of major crises such as the ongoing Russian invasion to Ukraine, the mass forced displacement of Armenians from their homes in Nagorno-Karabakh, as well as the attack of Hamas against Israel. In these difficult times, the human impact of the military actions is a top priority, and we must ensure that the protection of civilians is kept at the center of our efforts. The unacceptable offensive of Azerbaijan against the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, which constitute a blatant violation of international law, and the trilateral statement of 9th of November 2020 disrupted peace and stability in the region and massively violates human rights and humanitarian. I would like to welcome the proposed EU support measure to Armenia in order to address the current political, economic and humanitarian situation. The efforts for sustainable peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan must be based on the principles of recognition of sovereignty, inviolability of borders and territorial integrity. Regarding the situation in the Middle East, Hamas terrorist attacks against Israel are reprehensible. Taking hostages and using them as human shields for terrorists is a violation of international law and constitutes a war crime. Therefore, all hostages held by the terrorist group Hamas should be immediately and unconditionally released. At the same time, we must ensure the creation of humanitarian corridors to support strongly Gaza. The geographical position of my country, Cyprus, with long-standing excellent relations with the states of the region, are factors which can strengthen the creation of a humanitarian corridor towards Gaza. The Islamic State, or Al-Qaeda, and now recently Hamas, have launched unannounced attacks against societies and populations with methods of mass killing. This is not a simple war crime, but a documented act of genocide. Against these attacks, humanity must be relentless. Moreover, I would like to note that sanctions can be operated as a tool or as a mechanism protecting human rights, while it will be confronted against those who caused atrocities. It is not enough just to impose sanctions, but there should also be a mechanism which will oversee the respect and implementation of these actions. The crimes in Nagorno-Karabakh, Gaza, and elsewhere have highlighted the importance of accepting the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court with the aim of punishing those who commit war crimes or crimes against humanity, and with the ultimate goal of deterring them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kyriakos. Next speaker will be Dr. Hedy Fry from Canada, followed by Margareta Cederfelt from Sweden. Please, Hedy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like to take another look at this issue. We're talking about conflicts that we know are going on now, Nagorno-Karabakh, Ukraine. We've been seized with all of these issues. What is happening in the Middle East? We're discussing it. I want to talk about what our very first speaker spoke about, conflict. Why are we having so many more conflicts? Why can't we prevent conflicts? Remember, after the Second World War, we all defined the idea that we would deal with human rights, that we would set laws around conflicts so that people could not violate these international laws. We're seeing these laws violated everywhere, anyhow, with impunity. We're taking them to the criminal court. How long does that take after people have died and suffered? So we're looking at trying to find a way to remedy things instead of finding a way to prevent things. When we talk about conflict, we talk about minorities. We need to be careful as politicians about our language. Minorities are often a small group of people who don't really matter, do they? because they don't really belong to the great group, so therefore they can be treated in any way. The word minority is a charged word. I want us to walk away from that word. And remember, we're talking about human beings. Europe understood what it was like in the World War when all of Europe came to countries like Canada and the United States. They came as minorities. From every single European country, you were minorities. Today, you talk about minorities. What we're forgetting is we're talking about human beings. We talk about women as minorities. Women are the most at risk during war and conflict. And yet they're not a minority group. There are more women in the world than there are men. But women are at risk. People who we call minorities tend to be them. And we've divided the world into them and us. They are not as important as we are. They are therefore throwaway people. Language is important, and I would like us to think about the language we use when we talk about human rights, and when we talk about minorities, and when we talk about other, and when we talk about those people who are coming to our shores, all of those migrants. When we talk about them, we dehumanize them. We cannot continue to dehumanize human beings. We're all human beings. Today, we are, in the World War II, Europe were minorities. Today, other people are minorities. Let us remember, I want us to think about how we talk about each other and how we talk about human beings. Let us get back to the concept of human rights. When you treat people as other, you increase the security risk in your country because others want to belong. Others will always be seeking to belong, and that will always create security risks. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Heidi. Next speaker will be Margaretha Sederfeld, followed by Mark Demesmaker from Belgium. Please, Margaretha, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I thank the speakers for their introduction remarks. OSCE have the broad security perspective. And I think that's something that we should really be careful with, take care of, and use. It's important. It's important to recognize that peace, long-standing peace, it includes also respect for minorities. And I am very glad that Senator Ben Cardin is reappointed a special representative on anti-Semitism, racism, and intolerance. I think this is something that's needed today. It's almost 80 years since the Holocaust. The Holocaust happened in Europe. Today, sometimes there are people denying the Holocaust, not accepting that it have happened, but it's a part of our history. And we should have said before, and we are saying again, it should never happen again. There are still racism. There is still anti-Semitism. We could see it daily. We can read in newspapers. We can talk with Jewish people and hear about violence against the synagogues. We can hear about Jewish people who don't dare to bear their David star, who don't dare to have the kippah on their head. This is evidence on anti-Semitism. But what can we do as politicians? We have a true responsibility for this. We can't just say it's social media. We can't just say it's something that's happened in the society. There is somebody else who is responsible. We are responsible to speak out, to not let the Holocaust, the anti-Semitism, to be forgotten. We have to continue the dialogue, to promote dialogue. We have to raise awareness. And we have to promote best practice. We have to make laws. We have to promote education against anti-Semitism, against racism, against intolerance. And I see this as very important today. And it's just as important today as 80 years ago. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Margaretha. The next speaker will be Mark Demesmaker from Belgium, followed by Rebecca Monaghan from Ireland. Mark, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. There is, of course, no justification at all for the brutal ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh, of Artsakh, after a month-long siege, starvation of the people. And yet, it happened. It happened, despite all international mechanisms. I'm planning to visit a refugee center myself later tomorrow to talk to the people, to check their situation myself. I think we must all be ready to stand by Armenia and to assist them. Now, to say that children are always the most vulnerable victims of war is stating the obvious, isn't it? But in the Russian war against Ukraine, it takes on special proportions. We already knew that thousands of Ukrainian children have been deported to Russia. We know that the ICC prosecutor in The Hague is examining the allegations of forcible deportation of children. But utterly shocking is a new, well-documented report published just 3 days ago by the Yale School of Public Health's Humanitarian Research Lab that has found that at least 2,442 Ukrainian children have been taken to Belarus through Russia in a joint effort between Belarus and Russia, orchestrated at the highest levels of Russia's federal government and Belarus regime, and financed through the joint Russia-Belarus Union State budget. Their age between 6 and 17 years old. At least 6 groups were subjected to military training in Belarus, including by the internal troops of Belarus. The report documents the systemic targeting, and this is really sickening, of vulnerable children, children from low-income families, from large families, orphans. A critical element in that report is that the legislation was specifically amended to allow children to be moved from Ukraine without documented permission of their parents or guardians. The report identifies key figures, facilities, organizations involved. Investigation, Ms. Chair, by the ICC is one thing, but it won't bring the children home. What other international mechanisms do we have? What do we have to bring them home? I don't know. To the delegates from Belarus, you do know, don't you, that forcibly transferring children qualifies as genocide under the 1948 UN Genocide Convention. It was included in the convention as a reaction to the Nazi program of removing mainly Polish children to Germany for their Germanization. So before feeling tempted again to denazify other countries, please look no further, look into the mirror.
Thank you, Mark. The next speaker will be Rebecca Monaghan from Ireland, followed by Sif Moslet from Norway. Rebecca, the floor is yours. Would you please unmute your microphone, please, so that we can hear you?
Thank you, Madam Vice President. This session is about protecting minorities in conflict, and as we meet, the Armenian enclave in historic Jerusalem is being attacked by settlers threatening what is a historic community in Jerusalem. I was struck yesterday by a speaker from Ukraine who said that peace is only possible where people respect borders, language and culture. I would like to add to my own list and say that peace is only possible when people respect others' ethnicity and people's right to life, humanity and dignity. All of these things are under threat in Israel and Palestine, and they are not helped by countries who purport to be friends of Israel, who offer unqualified support for Israel's current crimes against humanity in Gaza. It is incumbent on the countries who consider themselves to be friends of Israel to tell their friend that it is not acceptable to engage in collective punishment of a population, half of whom are children, and the largest age cohort of victims being just 5. No 5-year-old is an enemy or a terrorist. No 5-year-old is responsible for the actions of Hamas, which we all condemn. But those brutal attacks don't give an unhindered right to target humanitarian infrastructure, threaten to starve, deny fuel, block essential humanitarian supplies. These actions are not defence, they are actions of aggression and they are war crimes. It is incumbent on the countries here who yesterday were at pains to support Israel to tell Israel that there is no way to bomb your way to peace. Peace does not come from military solutions, that only leads to a protracted stalemate. There can be no security without peace, and that peace can only be arrived at by respecting others' humanity and engaging in dialogue and supporting both the ceasefire and a two-state solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Next speaker will be Siv Moslat from Norway, followed by David Stockmüller from Austria. Siv, we are listening to you.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your leadership. Thanks also to Armenian host for organizing a meeting here in Yerevan in difficult times. I'm honored to be a part of the parliamentary support team for Ukraine and look forward to our future work. I also look forward to going to Kyiv. The Norwegian support for Ukraine is solid, long-term and strong. Norway launched the Nansen program of 7.3 billion euro. We know it's going to be a long, hard winter with all sorts of challenges for the people and for the country. And our support goes further than word. It's also concrete military and humanitarian help. The Norwegian Parliament has also agreed on a memorandum of understanding with the Parliament in Ukraine. Next week, we are pleased to welcome the first delegation from Ukraine. I'm very pleased that we got support of the Assembly for strong wording on Belarus in the Vancouver Declaration. I urge MPs to support a democratic Belarus by creating friendship groups in their parliament and supporting the democratic movement. I call on MPs support Belarusian civil society, NGOs and independent media, inside and outside the country. Last week, an alliance of friendship groups for a democratic Belarus met Svitlana Tikhanovskaya in Berlin and also went to the Bundestag. At least 22 parliaments have set up friendship groups for a democratic Belarus. I strongly hope that this alliance can inspire other MPs. According to a UN report, human rights have been further limited. We condemn the Lukashenko's regime move to stop people from renewing their passport outside the border of Belarus. The situation to get worse. More and more people are in prison for speaking freely. We condemn this situation and demand the release of all the political prisoners. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Siv. Next speaker will be David Stockmüller from Austria, followed by Joe Wilson from the US delegation. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Danke, Frau Vizepräsidentin. Es ist wie immer eine Ehre, heute hier zu sein, und ich möchte mich auch nochmal besonders bei der armenischen Delegation auch für die Organisation und Gastfreundschaft bedanken. Aus Gründen, die bedauerlicherweise keine Ausführung bedürfen, ist auch das heutige Panel Protecting Minorities and People Fleeing Conflicts ein sehr treffendes. Es gibt wenige Orte auf der Welt, die mehr zu diesem tragischen Thema wissen als Armenien. Von Vertreibung bis zu ethnischer Säuberung und Genozid. Ein Land, das die schrecklichen Konsequenzen von Krieg und ethnischer, kultureller Gewalt nur zu gut kennt. Bedauerlicherweise beschränkt sich das Vermächtnis des Genozids auch nicht auf 1915. Die Vertreibung von 100.000 Armeniern aus Bergkarabach im September ist Zeugnis, dass das Leid der armenischen Bevölkerung auch im 21. Jahrhundert noch tragisch aktuell ist. Gewaltsame Vertreibung darf nicht einfach von der internationalen Gemeinschaft, die wir alle hier auch vertreten, wortlos hingenommen werden. Die Bemühungen um eine langfristige und nachhaltige diplomatische Lösung und einer geregelten Rückkehr der vertriebenen Armenier und Armenierinnen müssen intensiviert werden. Aber hier müssen wir konsequent sein. Krieg, Gewalt und Vertreibung sind weltweit wieder im Steigen begriffen. Armenien, Ukraine, nun auch der Gaza. Eine internationale Gemeinschaft, die wählerisch ist, welche vertriebene Volksgruppen rechtlichen Schutz, Hilfsgüter, einen Anspruch auf Rückkehr verdienen und welche nicht, ist keine internationale Gemeinschaft. Sie ist eine Interessensvertretung gewisser mächtiger Staaten. Israels Recht, sich gegen die Gräueltaten der Hamas vom 7. Oktober zu wehren, ist absolut unbestritten. Der Kampf gegen internationalen Terror, vor allem antisemitischen, motivierten Terror, kann nicht von Gaza Halt machen. Und ich bedanke mich auch an Margareta Sederfeld für ihre Worte. Der Antisemitismus weltweit ist im Steigen, auch in unseren Ländern in Europa, dort, wo der Antisemitismus seinen höchsten und seine Gräueltaten begonnen hatten. Aber wenn wir uns als Teil auch von internationaler Gemeinschaft verstehen, als wertegeleitete, rechtsbasierte, humanistische Gemeinschaft, dann dürfen wir auch die nun 1,5 Millionen intern Vertriebenen in Gaza, überwiegend Frauen und Kinder, nicht im Stich lassen. Wir dürfen sie nicht im Stich lassen. Der Kampf gegen die Ursachen von Krieg und Gewalt kann nur im Einklang mit seriösem und umfangreichen physischen und rechtlichen Schutz für die Opfer derselben funktionieren. Frieden, nachhaltigen Frieden braucht mehr als nur Armenier und Aseris, Russen und Ukrainern, Israelis und Palästinenser. Frieden muss von uns allen gebaut werden. Ich schließe mich mit meinen Gedanken ab, der mich von der gestrigen Rede des armenischen Premierministers fast in Jahren im Kopf geblieben ist. Er sprach von der Notwendigkeit, heute Dämme zu bauen, um für die morgigen Fluten vorbereitet zu sein. Ich hoffe, er erlaubt mir eine Ergänzung, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen. Bauen wir nicht nur Dämme, bauen wir auch die Rettungsboote dazu. Vielen Dank.
Vielen Dank, David. Next speaker on the list is Joe Wilson from the US delegation, followed by Hanna Lichman from Ukraine. Dear Joe, we are listening to you.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. And indeed, it's so humbling to be here with so many dedicated public officials. And even if we disagree, it's respectful, and that's part of the process. And I'm just so grateful to be here. War criminal Putin's murderous invasion of Ukraine has exposed the critical need for international action to save both Ukraine's children and to put in place measures for the future that will protect children as well as vulnerable refugees from wartime atrocities and from other threats, such as human trafficking. This should be deterred in the 21st century, never to occur again. Dictators with the rule of gun have been invading democracies with rule of law, and I believe they will be defeated in Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. OSCE passed a resolution on this in Vancouver, but not enough has been changed in the meantime. Ukraine's children continue to suffer due to Russia's genocidal war of aggression on Ukraine, which Putin described in a treatise in August of 2021. Almost two-thirds of the country's children have been displaced, thousands have been injured, and hundreds have been killed. The Ukrainian government has documented close to 20,000 cases of children heinously kidnapped to Russia or Russian-controlled areas of Ukraine for forced Russification in a heinous strategy to erase their identity. This is a war crime and I believe amounts to genocide under the 1948 Genocide Convention. It is clear, additionally, that Hamas, as a puppet of Iran, is using innocent civilians as human shields and co-locating military commands at hospitals and schools as citizens are blocked by Hamas from relocating. In Israel, there are 2 million of Arab community, 21% of the population, and they live together, they work together, they vote together with the Jewish community. And so the Jewish community clearly is accepting the people of Arab ancestry and heritage, and they oppose genocide. But the world must remember, and I just hope everybody looks at this, we can see what the people opposed to decency, they make their positions known. In the Hamas covenant of August 18, 1988, the day of judgment will not come about until Muslims, quote, or fight the Jews and kill them. Then the Jews will hide behind rocks and trees, and the rocks and trees will cry out, "O Muslim, there was a Jew hiding behind me. Come and kill him." End of quote. They chant very freely and openly, "Death to Israel, death to America," and the rest of the world needs to know that would mean death to Europe, death to civilized society. I yield back.
Thank you, Joe. Next speaker will be Hanna Lichtman from Ukraine, followed by Kari Henriksen from Norway. So Hanna, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Since 24th February 2022, Russia has turned the sovereign territory of Ukraine into a place of the most vile crimes, summary executions, cases of torture, sexual violence, abduction, filtration camps, deportation, and other crimes are all parts of the premeditated actions of the aggressor states aimed to the extermination of Ukrainians. Guided by the provision of international law, the OCPPA must recognize the actions committed by the armed forces of the Russian Federation and its political and military leadership in Ukraine as a genocide of the Ukrainian people. But we must not forget that, in fact, the military aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine began in 2014. Since then, Russian invasion caused suffering of Crimean Tatar people, a significant part of which was forced to flee from Autonomous Republic of Crimea to the mainland of Ukraine. Crimean Tatars who remained in Crimea suffer from persecutions and repression by the Russian occupation authorities. They are thrown into prison, went missing, face torture. The Majlis, the representative body of the Ukrainian Tatar people, is recognized in Russia as extremist organization. Currently, Russia is illegally detaining at least 180 Ukrainian political prisoners from Crimea. Crimean Tatar activist Jamil Gafarov died in Russian captivity because he was refused proper medical care. Given the extreme graveness of situation, which endangers their health and lives, we call on the OCPPA to urge Russian Federation to uphold its all obligations under applicable international humanitarian law and humanitarian right law as an occupying power. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Hanna. Next speaker will be Kari Henriksen from Norway, followed by Gabor Haidiu from Romania. Dear Kari, we are listening to you.
Thank you, Mrs. Chair. And yesterday's debate and all our speakers here today reflects well the challenges in the world. More conflicts, terror, war, and inhumane treatment of minorities, refugees, and internally deported people. The conflict in the Middle East has become very polarized, as many other conflicts have. But today's conflict lines are harder, and the people are suffering more. Colleagues, as appointed OSCE PA Special Representative for South Caucasus, I have traveled around the area together with the President, Mrs. Pia Kauma, and I would like to share some of my reflections from this trip. I learned that all three countries have other refugees or IDPs. Russia is still occupying parts of Georgia. And early November, a man called Tamas Ginturi was killed by Russia because he was on the wrong side of the demarcation line. He visited a graveyard in Georgia, which is in Georgia, and he was on his way to the church, which is in the Russian-occupied territory, and he wanted to light a candle. And this is the situation for many refugees and for some people who live their lives in minority groups. Others control their lives and how they shall live them. Firstly, protecting groups at risk is a matter of protecting individuals and groups that are threatened, no matter what kind of leadership they live under. That does not mean that a government's policy shouldn't be criticized, but it must not lead to neglecting some groups or conflicts because of acknowledgement or disagreement of our own. We cannot have double standards when it comes to protecting persons at risk. Secondly, in my opinion, we need more knowledge and to share good practice in handling vulnerable groups. Some governments and politicians don't focus enough on gender and equality issues. Protecting especially women, children, and religious and LGBTI minorities in conflicts is key to me, and we know they suffer the most. No one is vulnerable per se, but some groups are vulnerable because they simply don't get enough protection from governments, police, military, or politicians. It's essential that we build more knowledge on how to protect people at risk so that we can enforce the correct measures to ensure every individual their human rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Karim. Next speaker will be Gabor Haidiu from Romania, followed by Stefan Demilly from France. Gabor, you have the floor. Please take it.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, stimați colegi, tisztelt Hölgyeim és Uraim! We are facing severe humanitarian crisis in conflict-affected OSCE areas. The protection of minorities is not only a matter of human rights, but also a cornerstone of social and geostrategic stability and peace. Minorities, whether defined by ethnicity, religion, language, or culture, often face systemic challenges that can range from social exclusion and structural discrimination to more severe forms of persecution and violence. Conflicts, unfortunately, remain a grim reality in many parts of the world, leaving behind a trail of devastation that affects entire communities. People caught in conflict zones face a multitude of hardships, including the loss of homes, livelihoods, and the loved ones. The protection of minorities is not solely the responsibility of states directly involved. It is a global concern that calls for international cooperation and solidarity. A concerted effort is required to uphold international laws and treaties that safeguard human rights. Additionally, there is a need for effective mechanisms to monitor and to respond to human rights violations. Global partnerships are essential for sharing best practices, mobilizing resources, and ensuring coordinated response in times of crisis. As OSCE states, we are in a unique position to lead by example and encourage this approach. We have to create and maintain fostering environments where all voices are heard and respected, where the rights of national minorities are protected, not just in words, but in actions. Our diversity is our strength, and our respect for diversity is the cornerstone of our collective stability. Thank you. Grateful to be here. Mulțumesc frumos. Köszönöm szépen.
Thank you, Gabor. Le prochain intervenant sera Stéphane Demilly de la France and will be followed by Victoria Spartz from the US delegation.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Mesdames, Messieurs, mes chers collègues, La situation des minorités à travers le monde est alarmante. Elle s'aggrave avec la montée des discours et des crimes de haine. Partout dans le monde, des clivages ressurgissent. Ces conflits entraînent un déni d'humanité, qu'il soit fondé sur les origines, la religion, la classe sociale ou le genre. Ils réduisent à néant les progrès durement acquis en matière de paix et de respect du droit international humanitaire. Les causes profondes des conflits les plus violents sont liées aux violations des droits humains des minorités. Un conflit en chasse un autre sur la scène internationale et nous assistons à un phénomène de déshumanisation et de barbarie impensable. D'ailleurs, permettez-moi de dire aux idéalistes que ce n'est pas parce que vous réglez le problème territorial palestinien que vous réglerez le problème du Hamas et de l'antisémitisme qui le caractérise, qui le fait vivre et qui le répand sur toute la planète. Régler le problème territorial est naturellement une condition nécessaire, mais j'ai peur que ce ne soit pas une condition suffisante. À cela s'ajoute un autre séisme, mes chers collègues, que nous allons devoir gérer. La confiance dans les organismes internationaux, de maintien de la paix en particulier, est fragilisée et même souvent décrédibilisée. C'est vraiment très grave. J'avais prévu, Madame la Présidente, une intervention beaucoup plus longue, mais en préparant cette intervention, j'ai trouvé une citation qui finalement résume parfaitement ce que je voulais dire. Elle va donc nous faire gagner du temps, même si elle est sujette à discussion. C'est une citation d'un prix Nobel de littérature, M. Albert Camus, qui disait, et je vous soumets cette phrase à votre sagacité, « La démocratie, ce n'est pas la loi de la majorité, mais la protection de la minorité. »
Merci Stéphane. Next speaker will be Victoria Spartz from the US delegation, followed by Pavlo Frolov from the Ukrainian delegation. Please, Victoria, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I'll be brief. I know that's late afternoon, but I just wanted to follow up on a few things that were mentioned, and I don't always agree with my Canadian colleagues, but I think it's a fair statement to say about, we do talk much about minorities, but in reality, we have, very significant human crises around the world, and we have to acknowledge that international organizations have failed. Millions of people, we have millions of people displaced, living in terrible conditions, killed, human trafficking, and it is a very serious situation. So we need to start thinking how we can do better and what needs to be done and how we're going to reform some of the institutions, because we participate in a lot of these institutions that failed and failed miserably. We have significant wars. We have a lot of people suffering. And I think that is a serious discussion. So I am not going to be talking, we talk about things that, maybe not within control, but I think it's a problem. When we talk about even a situation like, ceasefire and all these different things, unfortunately for a lot of these people, the only way to survive is to win. We probably should have had diplomacy before, big war started. They're not easy resolutions. And when war starts, a lot of people are going to die. And we have a lot of aggressive countries, they don't care about that. But we need to be more united to stand up against them and really stand up with action, not just resolutions, because only actions matter. And that's the only way how we can save millions of lives. So I hope we will start thinking about it. People who believe in freedoms, people who believe in justice and protection and equal rights. Because it's true, our actual republic is created to protect rights of minorities, views. That's why we are not a pure democracy in the United States. It was very important for our founding fathers. And I think we need to think about this. But it's not about that. It's about equality of rights for everyone. And we should not divide people and separate people. But we should start thinking about it, how we can be on the right side of history and stand up with the right things and protect and help people that fighting for freedoms to survive in a very brutal world and survive, by doing some action. So I would appreciate if we start, as organizations, start paying more attention how these conflicts could be resolved before we get into very serious one. And unfortunately, we actually spent too much time and got us into a very difficult situation. But I'm glad that we have this forum, and we, as the United States, always be supportive of the people that are willing to stand up and fight for freedoms and die for freedoms, but hopefully they will not have to do it, and we'll help them to win this war. So thank you for having us.
Thank you, Victoria. Next speaker will be Pavlo Frolov from Ukraine, followed by Lilit Galistian from Armenia. The floor is to Pavlo. Please
Thank you,
take
Madam
it.
Vice President. Dear colleagues, we appreciate the attention of the OSCE EPA to the protection of the rights and freedoms of deported Ukrainian children, forcibly displaced women, captured soldiers. This is very important and just. We are also extremely grateful to the governments of European countries, the United States, Canada, and others that assist Ukrainian refugees who have fled abroad from the horror of Russia's aggressive war against Ukraine. However, today I want to tell you about internally displaced persons, IDPs, in Ukraine. These are forced migrants who have lost everything: homes, jobs, friends, neighbors, socialization, and the usual peaceful life. Many of them have also lost loved ones or have been injured. In Ukraine, there are officially registered 5 million IDPs. According to estimates, over 4 million IDPs have fully destroyed or partially damaged housing. Colleagues, imagine how enormous these figures are. In Ukraine, the number of people without housing due to Russian aggression is particularly equal to the entire population of Croatia, or half of Austria or Sweden. These people are suffering and need help here and now. They cannot wait for decades until we defeat Russia and force it to pay reparations. One day of war cost us $100 million. All taxes, customs payments, dividends from state assets, revenues from privatization, the sale of governance bonds we have to spend for defense. Therefore, minimum payments for IDPs are provided through international aid. Not to everyone, but only to 2.6 million IDPs who receive 50 euros per month. 50 euros. But the rent for housing costs at least 3-4 times more. Frankly speaking, some of these people are not living, but essentially existing on the brink of life and death. Therefore, in Parliament, we, along with colleagues who are IDPs since 2014, have been helping IDPs on a volunteer basis from the first months of full-scale aggression. We seek humanitarian aid, defeat IDPs' rights, protect them in relation with executive branch, promote their socialization and integration into local communities. I initiated the creation of a special ad hoc committee in Parliament of Ukraine on IDP issues. I conclude, according to the estimate of World Bank and the European Commission, only in the first year of full-scale war, the damage of housing and other infrastructure amounted to 383 billion euros. Through the confiscation of Russian assets in Ukraine, we have launched the process of restoring critical energy, water and hot supply facilities and compensation for repairs to damaged housing. But at the current pace, we need 240 years for compensate recovery. Therefore, we kindly ask you, dear parliamentarians, not to reduce not only military aid, but financial and humanitarian aid to Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Pavlo. Next speaker on the list will be Lilith Galstian from Armenia. Ihr folgt Christine Schwarz-Fuchs aus Österreich. Lilith, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, our meeting is taking place in a volatile political environment where the fundamental rights of thousands of innocent people is under question. Thousands are suffering from war and aggression. Unfortunately, our region is one of those burning crossroads. What happened in Nagorno-Karabakh is an internationally recognized crime committed to eliminate an ethnic group. However, the disaster could have been avoided if the international community had shown interest. Our warnings about the imminent disaster remain unheard, and this continuing inadequate international response provides a green light for Azerbaijan to commit new war crimes without being held accountable. The genocidal starvation blockade was intended to push the indigenous people of Nagorno-Karabakh out of their homeland of 3,000 years. Please note, 3,000 years. Almost 150,000 Armenians, including those who were displaced during the war, were forced to flee to Armenia. Contrary to the November 9 statement, around 55 Armenian prisoners of war and civilians, including the elected officials of the Republic of Nagorno-Karabakh, have been illegally kidnapped and detained in Azerbaijan. In fact, they are political prisoners of Aliyev regime. In the occupied territories of Nagorno-Karabakh, Azerbaijan is conducting a documented policy of elimination of the rich Armenian cultural and religious heritage. Moreover, Azerbaijan has occupied 200 square kilometers of Armenia's sovereign territories and is repeatedly claiming Armenia as a Western Azerbaijan. The people of Nagorno-Karabakh appreciate the international humanitarian assistance, but what they seek is their safe return to their homeland. They cannot be denied the right to survival in their ancestral homeland. We should recognize that the brutal dictatorship of Azerbaijan cannot be trusted for the right and security of Armenians. Dear colleagues, the credibility of our organization also depends on our individual responsibility. I therefore, call on my colleagues to stand up for justice and for true democracy. I believe that everyone has a question in his mind. Are we doing enough to mitigate current or future wars and genocides? And my suggestion, in accordance with the obligations of our organization, we must lead the efforts to enforce guarantees and mechanisms to secure the return of the Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh to their homeland, or else we shall all become mere witnesses to yet another tragedy, sharing the responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Lilith, not only for your intervention, but also for having us and hosting our conference here in Yerevan. Thank you so much. Die nächste Sprecherin ist Christine Schwarz-Fuchs aus Österreich. She will be followed by Malika Kadir-Khanova from Uzbekistan. Christine, wir hören dir zu.
Dear colleagues, minorities, often marginalized and overlooked, deserve not only our recognition, but also our unwavering commitment to safeguarding their rights. These communities contribute to the rich tapestry of our global society, offering unique perspectives and cultural richness. However, they are all too often subject to discrimination, persecution, and violence. It is our collective responsibility to stand up against these injustices and foster an environment where every individual, regardless of their background, can live without fear or prejudice. Equally important is our duty to address the faith of those caught in the crossfire of conflicts. Wars and unrest tear apart the very fabric of communities. leaving individuals traumatized, displaced, and struggling for survival. The impact on children in particular is profound as they face the harsh reality of disrupted education, shattered homes, and the loss of normal childhood. To achieve a better life for minorities, we must collaborate across borders, cultures, and ideologies. Governments, religious leaders, and NGOs and individuals alike must unite in their efforts to promote inclusivity, tolerance, and understanding. We've heard today quite a few bad examples, but there are also positive examples in various countries, also in Austria, where I come from. I would like to stress out what Dr. Fernand de Varenne, the former UN Special Rapporteur on Minority Issues, said earlier in this session. He said prevention is important to avoid conflicts. So that's what we should emphasize on. Using the positive example of Italy, respectively South Tyrol's development from the Gruber-de Gasperi Agreement in 1946 through the South Tyrol question being on the agenda on the UN General Assembly in 1960 to the second autonomy statute and the recently achieved financial autonomy, I want to emphasize the importance of clear rules needed to guarantee the rights of minorities. South Tyrol's autonomy has successfully contributed to pacifying the conflict. The development of the economy as well as the society in South Tyrol has been positive. It can be said that Italy has managed this well together with the region of South Tyrol. Before I end, I would like to recall the UN Declaration on the Rights of Minorities adopted about 30 years ago. It says, among other things, that individuals belonging to national or ethnic, religious, and linguistic minorities have the right to enjoy their own culture, profess and practice their own religion, and use their own language privately and publicly, freely and without interference or any form of discrimination. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Next speaker will be Malika Kadirkhanova from Uzbekistan. She will be followed by Christos Senekis from Cyprus. Malika, the floor is yours, please.
Благодарю вас, госпожа председатель. Выступающие до меня спикеры тоже отметили, что мы живем в особое время, полное глобальных проблем. Вчера госпожа Пия неоднократно говорила об улучшении гендерного баланса, увеличении участия женщин в рамках мероприятий по ОБСЕ. И я думаю, гендерно чувствительные парламенты нужны сейчас как никогда. На фоне более острых политических, экономических, социальных и экологических катаклизмов, которые сами по себе гендерно обусловленные, и особенно по защите уязвимых слоев населения. Сексуальное и гендерно обусловленное насилие представляет собой серьезные нарушения прав человека. Такая опасность, постоянно существующая даже в мирное время, еще больше повышает во время различных социальных и вооруженных конфликтов. К сожалению, сегодня насилие в отношении женщин и девочек является одним из наиболее широко распространенных, трудноискоренимых и ведущих к катастрофическим последствиям нарушения прав человека в современном мире. У нас в республике, благодаря политической воле президента, вопрос обеспечения прав женщин, укрепления их положения в общественной жизни и семье возведен в ранг государственной политики. Только за последние 3 года принято около 50 нормативно-правовых актов. Предпринимаются важные шаги по борьбе с насилием в отношении женщин. В текущем году был принят закон. Мы законодательно ужесточили наказание за семейно-бытовое насилие в отношении женщин и детей. В республике на данный момент образованы 29 шелтеров, центров реабилитации и адаптации женщин, которые оказывают экстренную медицинскую, психологическую, социальную, педагогическую, правовую помощь в анонимной форме женщинам, ставшими жертвами насилия. Вместе с тем Узбекистан предпринимает системные меры по обеспечению защиты прав женщин и девушек, оказавшихся в зоне боевых действий. Власти Узбекистана репатриировали своих граждан на родину, оградили их от стигматизации, обеспечили им доступ к защите основных прав, в том числе экономических и социальных. Принятые правительством Узбекистана совместно со спецслужбами иностранных государств меры позволили реализовать гуманитарную акцию «Мехр» по репатриации граждан Узбекистана из зон вооруженных конфликтов на Ближнем Востоке и Афганистане. Уважаемые дамы и господа, Узбекистан заинтересован в дальнейшем развитии международного сотрудничества, имплементации передового опыта стран-партнеров в данной сфере. И в конце своего выступления хотела сказать, что эта работа по недопущению гендерно обусловленного насилия должна быть системной, повседневной и повсеместной. Только сообща мы сможем преодолеть все вызовы и испытания, построить мирное, безопасное, лучшее будущее для наших женщин и детей. Благодарю за внимание.
Thank you, Malika Kadir-Khanova. Next speaker will be Christos Senekis from Cyprus, followed by Inka Hopsu from Finland. Christos, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, the protection of minorities and those caught in the crossfire of conflict is unfortunately a pertinent issue. Conflict zones are breeding grounds for suffering. Innocent civilians, including women, children, and the elderly, bear the brunt of war. Their homes are destroyed, families torn apart, their futures are shattered. So it is our duty to extend a helping hand to those who have lost everything. Cyprus, having experienced the consequences of conflict and forced displacement due to the Turkish invasion of 1974 and the ongoing military occupation since then, could not but sympathize the more than 120,000 ethnic Armenians which had to flee Nagorno-Karabakh just over a month ago. We very much hope that they can be supported and facilitated to rebuild their future, which will hopefully be free from further conflict and instability, and that the international community will provide them both with the short-term protection as well as long-term support they need. At the same time, people are severely affected by the conflict between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. Wishing to contribute to alleviating the humanitarian consequences of this conflict, the President of the Republic of Cyprus, Nikos Christodoulidis, had presented at the Paris International Conference on Humanitarian Aid the Amalthea Initiative. This initiative proposes the functioning of a sea corridor through Cyprus. Such a corridor will facilitate the uninterrupted and safe delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza. This initiative, which has received significant support by the President of France, has been discussed at length with Israel, the Palestinian Authority, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, EU member states, and EU institutions, as well as the United Nations, whose contribution is decisive for the implementation and success of the initiative. However, I cannot but stress enough that alongside the efforts to provide humanitarian aid, there is a need to remain committed to reviving the political prospects to reach a two-state solution in accordance with the pertinent UN Security Council resolutions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christos Senekis. Next speaker will be Inka Hopsu from Finland. She will be followed by Andrei Savinik from Belarus. Inka, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you also for the both keynote speakers. Tomorrow is the International Day of Children's Rights. For the sake of children and other innocent victims of any war, the world should be able to focus on and support the victims of several conflicts at a time, not just the one that is dominating the news at a specific time. Because how can we ask for the support of the so-called Global South for our thinking and important fight against Russia's illegal war on Ukraine if we turn our back on conflicts, violence and human suffering in other parts of the world? At the same time as we condemn Hamas' atrocious attack on civilians in Israel, we must strongly condemn Israel's unproportional response and killings of innocent civilians in Gaza. While we rightly demand the protection of civilians and end of war in Ukraine, we must equally demand an immediate ceasefire in Gaza to save the lives of civilians. Peace negotiations and serious steps towards a long-term and two-state solution should be started without delay. If we want to be serious about ending conflicts and prevent wars, we must end using dividing double standards. All conflicts lead to human suffering, destruction and despair, regardless of if it happens in our neighborhood or on the other side of the globe. We must defend the rights of all people to live in peace and security. The rights to freedom and democracy belong to all. And if we claim to defend these values, we must be consistent and fair. Thank you.
Thank you, Inka. The next speaker will be Andrei Savinik from Belarus, followed by Attila Tilki from Hungary. Mr. Savinik, the floor is yours.
Благодарю вас. Уважаемые участники заседания, Беларусь неукоснительно выполняет международные обязательства по оказанию помощи людям, пострадавшим от конфликтов. Так, с февраля 2022 года в Беларусь въехало более 127 тысяч украинских граждан. Из них около 60 тысяч прибыло с территории Европейского Союза. Беженцы из Украины получают социальную помощь, принимаются на работу без подтверждения документов об образовании и получают бесплатную медицинскую помощь. И здесь я хотел бы ответить на заявление представителя Бельгии. Да, действительно, Беларусь приглашает детей из зоны конфликта, всегда на небольшой срок, около месяца, чтобы они могли отдохнуть и получить медицинскую помощь в мирных условиях. Эти дети приглашаются всегда в сопровождении взрослых и всегда с согласия их родителей. Представители международных организаций системы ООН контролируют эти действия. Поэтому я могу смело сказать, что ваши обвинения беспочвенны. Таким ложным обвинением в свое время дал великолепную характеристику еще великий английский писатель Вильям Шекспир, который написал в одном из своих произведений «The tongue of slander never silent». Но могу вас заверить, что мы и дальше будем помогать людям и особенно детям в беде. Но я хотел бы обратить ваше внимание и на другую проблему, с которой мы столкнулись в последние годы. Это поток мигрантов, которые не планируют оставаться в Беларуси. Это люди, которые пытаются попасть в страны ЕС, используя Беларусь для транзита. Всем хорошо известно, что они бегут от военных конфликтов и цветных революций, инспирированных, организованных и поддерживаемых странами коллективного Запада. И я хочу обратить внимание участников Ассамблеи, что органы Европейского Союза в одностороннем порядке несколько лет назад разрушили систему совместной работы с Беларусью по обеспечению пограничной безопасности. Эти односторонние действия Европейского Союза привели к сокращению потенциала пограничной службы. Но мы более всего поражены даже не этим. Мы возмущены действиями пограничных служб Латвии, Литвы, Польши, которые под предлогом борьбы с миграционной угрозой избивают мигрантов, задерживают их и выталкивают на территорию Беларуси. Неоднократно военнослужащие пограничных подразделений Латвии, Литвы, Польши выталкивали этих несчастных обратно на территорию Белоруссии. Многие из этих людей нуждались в неотложной медицинской помощи и были в очень плохом, опасном для их жизни состоянии. Мы уже зафиксировали более десятка случаев, когда на нашу территорию перебрасывали трупы мигрантов с многочисленными следами побоев. Могу вас заверить, что все эти факты тщательно документируются в соответствии с международными требованиями и передаются в соответствующие международные организации. И мы искренне надеемся, что эти преступления получат с течением времени должную правовую оценку. Благодарим за внимание.
Next speaker on the list is Attila Tilki from Hungary. He will be followed by Georgios Nikitiadis from Greece. Attila, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the floor, Madam Chair. In recent years, many crises have hit the world, including our broader region, such as coronavirus epidemic, wars, environmental disasters, which have had a major impact on the lives of national minorities. Crisis management by states and related measures have often affected national minority communities. The crises have turned international public attention away from the importance of preserving linguistic, cultural differences and diversity, which has given room for this to be used to justify assimilationist agendas. States must see their traditional national minorities not as potential threats, but as partners. They must help them to thrive in their homelands, where they can preserve their national identity, their ancestral traditions, and their institutional system, their educational network. Ethnic, linguistic, cultural, and historical differences should not be eliminated, but should be seen as values on which to build a fruitful coexistence with the majority nation. Instead of treating national minorities as second-class citizens, which results in their alienation, states should engage in meaningful consultation with them, taking their needs into account. States must not deprive them of their rights, for example, by disproportionately restricting their mother tongue education or by denying them other minority rights guaranteed by international conventions. That is what happened in the case of the Hungarian community in Transcarpathia, which has had to endure a number of rights restricting measures after 2015. International fora, expert bodies such as Venice Commission has confirmed the Ukraine's new education law, the language law, the law on national minorities, the media law, do not meet the international standards. The OSCE High Commissioner on National Minorities recently celebrated its 30th anniversary. The Commissioner stressed that inclusion of national minorities in economic and social life is a crucial element of democracy, particularly in multi-ethnic societies, as it fosters unity, breaks down societal divisions. These recommendations underline the need for states to take positive measures to ensure that national minorities can learn in their own language, that they participate in public life, in a social and economic life, and can do so in their own language. We hope that our Ukrainian friends will understand what does minority rights mean. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Attila Tilki. The next speaker will be Georgios Nikitiadis from Greece. He will be followed by Arthur Hovhannisyan from Armenia. It's hard to pronounce, but I try my best. So, Georgios, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President, dear colleagues. It is a great honor addressing this Parliamentary Assembly today. It is the first time from my side. Coming from the Greek Parliament as a member of the Social Democratic Party of PASOK, representing the electoral area of the Dodecanese Islands, which receives sizable migratory flows on a daily basis, it is for me a necessity in any event to report to you on the subject of migration. On two of the islands of my area, namely the islands of Kos and Leros, there are official facilities today operating which at this time host numbers of people far beyond their capacity. The recent wars in our region necessarily bring us before great responsibilities. We all have a duty to put pressure on our parliaments so that we can properly manage the huge problem of migration, while at the same time showing that Europe remains the continent with the strongest democratic institutions. I believe that our policies must aim into three main directions. First, we have an obligation to invest much more than we currently do in all countries of transit. It is these countries and their people who bear the largest burden. Second, we must act with solidarity, both the member states and countries among us, and also we as individuals towards each one of our fellow human beings who, either because of military conflicts or for reasons of political or religious freedom, are forced to abandon their homelands for a better world and a better life. Third, as the situation stands today, we must decisively fight the illegal exploitation of migrants by building mechanisms and programs that will lead to legal ways of expecting the flows of migration. We have to understand and probably admit that among all these people, immigrants and political refugees, there are thousands of skilled workers and a large number of scientists who are literally brilliant minds. Only by adopting mechanisms and programs with the above spirit, we can successfully end the inhuman exploitation of all those who, falling victim to modern slave traders, pay huge sums of money and put their lives at great risk in order to reach a country which for them is a space of freedom and prosperity. With these words, Madam President and dear colleagues, I close my first address to this Assembly, hoping that I have given you a small inspiration to work on this extremely serious matter before your national parliaments. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgios. I think we share your hope. Next speaker will be Arthur Hovhannisyan from Armenia. He will be followed by Gisèle Jourda from France. Arthur, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome everyone to Yerevan. A few months ago in Vancouver, when it was being decided that the next assembly would be held in Armenia, we could not have imagined that we would discuss the issue of protecting the rights of people affected by conflicts in a country where 100,000 Armenians forcibly displaced from Nagorno-Karabakh would be living for already 2 months. In the previous session, we warned about the real danger of ethnic cleansing by Azerbaijan in Nagorno-Karabakh. Of course, statements were made, resolutions adopted, and several decisions made by the International Court, but the fact is that right now, if you travel around Armenia, you will meet the same people who, according to the resolutions, statements, and even the decisions of the International Court, should have been living in their homeland and not become refugees. Dear colleagues, This is not a complaint against the international community for not preventing ethnic cleansing, but a record that the existing tools are not effective in preventing ethnic cleansing and protecting people from authoritarian regimes. All this should give us a reason to think deeply about having new tools and approaches that will allow us not just to wrangle with text, but to take effective measures with hands-on actions. The best way to protect human rights is democracy, and the best environment is peace. Therefore, we must promote democracy and build peace together. The Republic of Armenia offers the countries of the region to move from words to actions and presents a concrete program titled Crossroads of Peace, which is about building peace that will be not only the interest of our region, but also far beyond it. And I hope that the civilized world will stand by democracy and peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Arthur. The next speaker will be Gisèle Jourda from France. She will be followed by Thanasis Papathanasis from Greece.
Merci, Madame
Gisèle, la parole est à vous.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Mes chers collègues, nous avons mis au cœur de nos travaux d'automne la paix, la sécurité. J'y ajoute le respect. Respect des personnes, du droit international dans les conflits et du droit humanitaire tout court. Je voudrais évoquer la situation au Haut-Karabakh dont vous connaissez comme moi l'histoire, le tracé des frontières en 91, les tensions qui en ont découlé, les épisodes de guerre, les tragiques déplacements des personnes, tantôt azerbaïdjanaises, tantôt arméniennes. Le Caucase mérite la paix. Ses habitants ont droit à la sérénité et à la coexistence pacifique. Les populations civiles, quelle que soit leur origine, doivent être protégées. Aucune menace ni incertitude ne doivent peser sur elles. Les promesses déjà faites que les droits et les libertés des populations arméniennes seraient garantis conformément aux textes nationaux et internationaux vont dans le bon sens, ainsi que les annonces relatives à la réintégration des résidents arméniens et à la garantie de leurs droits. Ces promesses doivent être tenues, réalisées. C'est impératif. Je vois comme un signal fort pour la paix que l'Azerbaïdjan ait invité l'Organisation des Nations Unies à se rendre dans la région et que la commissaire aux droits de l'homme du Conseil de l'Europe ait pu accéder au Haut-Karabakh. Je souhaite ardemment que l'Azerbaïdjan revienne sur sa décision de ne pas s'engager dans les pourparlers de paix sous médiation américaine. Un message fort prenant la voie qui mène vers la signature d'un accord de paix avec l'Arménie serait le bienvenu. Les populations civiles ne doivent plus être victimes de ce conflit trop longtemps enduré. Toutes les personnes déplacées, azerbaïdjanaises comme arméniennes, doivent pouvoir regagner leur foyer, y vivre sans la peur des attaques, des mines, des explosifs, des dommages et atrocités de la guerre. Tous les enfants doivent grandir sans haine liée à leur origine ethnique. Le Haut-Karabakh est depuis longtemps un foyer de tension. Il est temps à toutes les parties prenantes de se rassembler pour trouver une solution définitive, juste, durable et équitable, pour que personne ne se sente spolié, pour que tous retrouvent la paix et la sécurité. Mes chers collègues, le chemin vers la réconciliation sera extrêmement long, mais il doit être amorcé et nous pouvons y contribuer car depuis notre enceinte peut surgir une voie vers l'apaisement et le dialogue. Je vous remercie.
Merci Gisèle. The next speaker will be Thanasis Papathanasis from Greece. He will be followed by Mrs. Celia Grootheder from Belgium. Dear Thanasis, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed delegates, it is an honor to address the distinguished gathering of the OSCE Summit hosted in the beautiful city of Yerevan. As we deliberate on matters crucial to the collective security and stability of our region, we must take a moment to reflect on the plight of minorities and communities affected by conflict. Their experiences serve as a sobering reminder of the challenges we still face in upholding the principles of human rights, peace and security. The OSCE's commitment to addressing the needs of minority communities and those impacted by conflict is as vital today as it has ever been. Across our diverse member states, we are witnessing the profound impact that conflicts and societal tensions have on minority groups. The rights and well-being of these communities must be safeguarded, and their voices must be heard in seeking solutions to the complex challenges they face. It is incumbent upon us to ensure that every individual, regardless of their ethnicity, religion, or belief, enjoys equal rights and opportunities. We must work tirelessly to protect and promote the cultural, linguistic, and religious diversity that enriches our societies. It is through inclusivity and respect for diversity that we can build more resilient and cohesive communities, fostering an environment where all can thrive. As we confront the human cost of conflict, we must commit ourselves to finding sustainable solutions that prioritize the protection of civilians and the rights of minority communities. This means strengthening our efforts to address the root causes of conflict, to mitigate the impact of hostilities on civilians, and to implement mechanisms for conflict prevention and resolution. Humanitarian assistance and support for affected communities and critical components of our collective response. We must ensure that those who have been displaced or marginalized as a result of conflict are provided with the necessary support, including access to basic services, education, and livelihood opportunities. It is only through our shared commitment to solidarity and compassion that we can alleviate the suffering of those most affected by conflict. The OSCE's comprehensive approach to security must incorporate the protection of minorities and vulnerable communities as a fundamental pillar of our collective endeavor. By advancing effective policies and programs that prioritize the needs and rights of all individuals, we can contribute to a more peaceful, just and inclusive future for our region. In closing, let us reaffirm our dedication to upholding the rights of minority communities and those affected by conflict. Let us work together in a spirit of cooperation and empathy to build societies where diversity is celebrated and the rights of all individuals are protected. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker will be Celia Grootherder from Belgium. She will be followed by Ingrid Asirsense from Latvia. Celia, the floor is yours.
Dear colleagues, dear Chair, this dimension is so essential today. Of course, because in any conflict, the most likely victims are the societally repressed, sometimes demographic majorities like women. Of course, repressing those who aid them is often the next consequence. International NGO workers, the free press, the independent watchkeepers who defend the scapegoats, who point out the excuses for repression. They are made to be so-called adversaries, just like the principles defending them, the independent judicial system, the international law of war, equal rights and opportunities, combating bigotry and exclusion. And many here will agree that these values today are under attack, and many will include social democracy and defense of our environment within. But the analysis we give might differ. I defend that one of the main reasons is that the identitarian movements are not just rising, but breeding hatred about not doing the wrong thing, but being the so-called person or being the so-called wrong group. And this approach and rhetoric has spread far beyond the self-identified identitarian movement. It is creeping in erosion of values and institutions into the tissue of our societies and indeed politics. It has come to the point that it daily seeps in with self-identified Democrats drenching the institutions we have so carefully constructed. And it always starts small, with the end justifying the means. It's like using doping in sports. In the long term, it erodes our very democratic tissue. The identitarian current is omnipresent, the examples are omnipresent, and so are the consequences. And the greatest catastrophes in this conflict And crisis-fraught times are bred from the smaller hatred. And it is so easy in tense times to give in to the tribal, identitarian way of thinking. But it breeds more conflict, more pain. Ultimately, it can breed death, and it does. First and foremost, within minorities and those who report upon and protect them. It is a sorry sign of our times that the careful and active guardianship of so-called independent institution, of liberal democracy, of equal and humane treatment of minorities, which has so carefully been built, is so clearly in the facts not self-evident anymore. It is a sorry sign we have to defend this self-evident baseline, that it is not an option, not a pastime, not a charity subject, not an obligatory check to put on a form. It is not an excuse for the start of a conflict or polarization. It is certainly not a political current or fashion. Our institutions, our liberal democracies, our values are the canary in the coal mine for each of us. They are an essential red line, and it is being fraught at an alarming pace. This essential red line, which I believe may be the essence of our work in this very body altogether, must be defended, because we do not only betray minorities by not defending them, we betray our common humanity. Thank you.
Hartelijk bedankt, Celia. Next speaker will be Ingrida Sirsen from Latvia. She will be followed by Zvonimir Troskot from Croatia. Ingrida, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Dear colleagues, today we gather to discuss a critical topic within the OSCE's role in times of crisis: respect for all, protecting minorities and people affected by conflicts. OSCE's member state, Russia, aggressor, started war in Ukraine, and 1.5 years later, Hamas did the same in Israel. It's because we didn't stop Russia. We didn't estimate the danger of this process. We had to stop it immediately. Let us begin by recognizing the nature of our responsibility, legal and moral. The OSCE serves as a platform to address these issues, transforming principles into actionable steps. We are not passive observers, but rather advocates for change, for peace and security. We also are responsible for killed women and children. What will be the next victims of aggressors? Maybe Armenia, maybe Georgia once more, maybe Taiwan. It's unbelievable to listen today from representatives of Belarus, lies and propaganda, how they are taking care for Ukraine refugees. In the middle of current conflicts, such as ongoing situation in Ukraine, the challenges faced by minority communities are particularly evident and pressing. Our advocacy must extend beyond immediate humanitarian needs to embrace sustainable solutions. It's not merely about protection, it's about empowerment of our understanding of values and responses. Lives of people is very high price. The conflict in Ukraine is a poignant reminder of the human cost of such disputes. It's critical that we, as representatives committed to the OSCE's principles, use our collective influence to promote respect for human rights and the protection of minorities in the affected regions. Our commitment to the rights of minorities is not a theoretical viewpoint, it's a call to action. The OSCE Parliamentary Assembly stands for inclusivity, respect and the protection of rights. It's our shared responsibility to translate these principles into lived experiences for those we represent. Let us recognize that our strength as an assembly is in our unity. United, we have the power to advocate for the rights of the marginalized and guarantee that the commitment to respect for all goes beyond becoming a fundamental principle in the societies we stand for. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrida. Next speaker will be Zvonimir Troskot from Croatia. He will be followed by Gudula Likens from Belgium. Zvonimir, the floor is yours. Can you unmute your microphone, please, so that we can hear you?
Dear Madam Chair, in the context of the current situation, especially in Europe, I would like to address one important topic which is now being debated all around Europe: migrants. Croatia is under the invasion of migrants, which include mainly countries that are not coming from the conflict, persecuted, or war zones. On our territory, we are currently seeing only men aged from 20 to 40 that are alone and single, without children and women, where some of them carry the French machetes and some of them carry fire weapons. We had cases where the migrants or their traffickers fired shots on our special border police officers. The same cases took place in the surrounding countries, and many countries started introducing military checkpoints on their borders. Some of them introduced even military police checkpoints in the cities. Madam Chair, when one starts to opening up this rather uncomfortable topic, immediately labels such as xenophobic or Islamophobic start popping up. But in case of Croatia, these labelings immediately drop flat, because Serbs living close to the border, or rather a better example, Muslims living on the Balkan route, feel the same fear, mistrust, and anxiety. Great majority of migrants come from countries that are under the visa regime. They often have a huge package of money on themselves. They are paying the stuff with the European banks' credit debit cards, or they use PayPal. Where from? Croatian citizens who live near the border areas expressed strong concerns. They are afraid to let their children go alone to and from school because of the presence of illegal migrants. They do not hesitate to enter the local people's yards where they urinate. They stay in parks while children used to play, break into people's houses, and so on. As I often talk with women from all mentioned nations, they all testify that they obtain gazes and looks from migrants, they devour and despise them at the same time. How to protect our women from the gazes I described? How to prevent sexual violences which are taking place all around Europe? How to prevent potential funerals of police officers where flags are carefully folded into the symbolic tri-corner shapes? These are not my questions, Madam Chair. These are questions raised by local people from all national groups. People that raised all these questions also told me to convey here: we do not want to live in fear, no matter which fear prefix is being used. We just want our security back. Whoever wants to come to live with us, let him or her come legally. Madam Chair, to conclude, I would like to introduce another phobia, which is growing bigger and bigger. It's called oikophobia. Oikos in Greek means home or household, homeland. And oikophobia, therefore, an aversion to a home environment to such an extent that your own culture and heritage is criticized or rejected over other cultures which for some reason become more valuable than your own. The question remains, why?
Thank you so much, Zvonimir. The next speaker will be Gudula Likens from Belgium. She will be followed by Frederica Honori from Italy. Gudula, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just briefly, because I'm a new member of this group, so let me just start by expressing my gratitude towards you all OSCE members gathering here together. It's very heartwarming to see this interparliamentarian cooperation, and it's heartwarming, but I think it's especially very important that we stand united this afternoon addressing the principles of human rights. Now, as said by so many of my colleagues in conflict zones around the world, the first victim too often is human rights, the violation of the very essence of our shared humanity. And I'm a trained psychologist, and I think we all realize that the violations of human rights in conflict, it's not isolated incidents. It's important that we realize that they have long-lasting consequences. Scars of war passed along through generations, affecting communities long after the guns have fallen silent. And therefore, they can be the breeding ground for the next conflict, causing some kind of a vicious circle. I think that's really very important. So yes, we as parliamentarians, we need not only to strive for justice and accountability, we also can lay the groundwork for a more peaceful future. We can play a crucial role in conflict prevention, because prevention always is better than the cure. And we can do that by shaping policies, promoting dialogue, and enhancing international cooperation. But I would like to add one personal point more, and that is that we could lead by example as well. Honestly, I feel a certain paradox sitting here and listening to us all, because let's face it, how often do we come across political campaigns that thrive on polarization and stigmatization? Colleagues, I want to tell you, our words matter, our actions matter, our campaigns matter. We can promote and protect human rights, or we can contribute to its erosion by creating a hostile climate, talking hate speech, by targeting minorities in our campaigns, like the LGBTQI+ community in Poland and Hungary, for instance, by using xenophobic narratives, by excluding certain groups. So this attitude is a slow but an effective poison for democracy and for human rights. So if we are honestly here this afternoon and we strive for respect for human rights, we need to be the moral compass. We need to put our hand on our own heart and ask ourselves the question, do we want to be part of the problem, or do we want to be part of the solution? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gudrun. Next speaker will be Frederica Honori from Italy. She will be followed by Linnea Wickman from Sweden. Frederica, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Vice President, dear colleagues. First of all, I want to express my gratitude to and congratulate on Armenian colleagues and friends for their lovely hospitality. I would like to use these 3 minutes I'm offered to highlight the importance of building inclusive societies as a means to prevent instability, interstate tensions, and eventually conflicts. And let me say that I found it pretty meaningful that we hold this session on minorities and conflicts here in Armenia, since Armenian people experienced and still experience on their skin how it feels like to be a minority involved in a conflict. So when we talk about inclusive societies, we can perhaps start by asking ourselves how an inclusive society looks like. Clearly, an inclusive society is a place where people belonging to ethnic minorities, religious minorities, linguistic minorities have their rights recognized. And let me, in relation to that, I think it's useful to remind the Bolzano recommendation on national minorities, published and disseminated by the OSCE High Commissioner on National Minorities in 2008. But an inclusive society, also is a society that does not discriminate people for their sexual orientation, for example. An inclusive society is a society where, for example, women have the right to have a job for which they are paid just as a man would be paid. An inclusive society is a society where women have the right and possibility also to raise a family if they desire so, but also a society where they can decide freely and autonomously whether they want to break up a relationship. That is to say, an inclusive society is a society where women should never, never be afraid of paying with their own life the decision of breaking up and interrupting a relationship. And that is why I want to tell you about Julia Cecchettin. Julia Cecchettin was a young Italian woman, aged 22. She was studying biomedical engineering at Padua, north of Italy. Giulia was murdered just 1 week ago by her ex-boyfriend who could not accept her decision to break up. You know, in Italy, we do keep track and monitor and count on how many women lose their life by the hand of their previous loved ones, and Giulia is number 105 since the beginning of this year. Colleagues, there is urgent need to build more inclusive societies. And as politicians, some of us are even political leaders, we share the responsibility, I believe, to make our society a more inclusive place for everyone, since this will also mean a safer place for all. So let's keep inclusiveness among our top priorities and let's act concretely on that. Thanks.
Thank you. Next speaker will be Linnea Wickman from Sweden. She will be followed by Socrates Famalos from Greece. Linnea, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the speakers and thank you to the Armenian delegation for hosting this autumn meeting with great hospitality. Dear colleagues, the way in which a government treats minority populations, and especially minority groups that may not have special protections granted, can serve as a good measure of the level of respect for human rights in a society. Across the OCE region, we can see that LGBTI people in particular are a vulnerable group that is often targeted during election campaigns. In these campaigns, homophobic views that belong in the dustbin of history are deliberately fueled by various political forces, which increase the vulnerability and the risk of violence against LGBTI people. Everyone should be able to be themselves without fear, to be open about their sexual orientation and gender identity. No one should face discrimination, hatred, and intolerance because of their identity. Ensuring this in the OCE and in our countries is a question of rights, but it's also a question of common security where no one is left behind or marginalized. Before the start of the OCE autumn meeting, I have the opportunity, together with the Swedish delegation, to meet representatives from Armenian civil society who work to support LGBTI people and the rights and living conditions of both girls and women. They told us about the situation for the women from Nagorno-Karabakh after the ethnic cleansing by Azerbaijan. They also expressed the satisfaction that the national legislation in Armenia to combat domestic violence has been strengthened, but emphasized the importance of Armenia and other countries to ratify the Istanbul Convention for Action Against Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence. We also see how sexual violence in conflicts against women is widespread, including for women who have been forced to flee. In many armed conflicts, sexual violence is part of the warfare, and its use as a weapon of war is increasing. For example, we see this in Russia's illegal war in Ukraine. Ukraine's efforts to recognize, address, and hold perpetrators to account can serve as an inspiration and an example for us all on how to combat gender-based violence in the OCE region during times of war. Thank you.
Thank you, Linnea. Next speaker will be Socrates Famalos from Greece, and he will be followed by Valérie Boyer from France. And we normally would like to close the list with these speakers, but we added three more speakers to the list who wanted to react on the speech of Mr. Savinik from Belarus. But I want to remind you that all those who want to intervene on or to react on a speech of one of our colleagues have not 3 minutes to react, but just 1. So we added 3 more speakers, and these 3 will be Giderius Surplice from Lithuania, Radoslav Fogiel from Poland, and Mark Demesmaker from Belgium. But first, the floor is to Socrates Familis from Greece. Socrates, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, dear President, dear colleagues. In 2015 till 2019, Greece managed to respond successfully to the worst refugee crisis that was faced by Europe since World War II, respecting human rights and international law, insisting on EU-wide solutions and cooperation, not by playing on nationalism and racism. Millions of refugees arrived in Greece because of conflicts in Syria, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan and Palestine. We managed to respond, despite the financial crisis in Greece, with limited funding for the Coast Guard and the police and a weak asylum service. Against European conservative forces and the decision of other countries to close their borders to the north. Today, instability because of conflicts continues, and Armenians have fled from Nagorno-Karabakh to Armenia en masse after the aggressive attack of Azerbaijan. Over 5 million Ukrainians fled to Europe after the illegal Russian invasion, and internally displaced people in Gaza are more than 1.5 million. But the displacement of populations is not only the result of conflict and of the ineffectiveness of multilateral organization to act to prevent or stop it. A new wave of refugees is created because of poverty and of the climate crisis. The only way to deal with these challenges is to stand against easy nationalist solutions. We must protect our borders on the basis of respect of international law, so that the tragedies that we saw in Lampedusa or in Pylos, where 600 people drowned in the summer, are never repeated again. We must promote cooperation and migration pacts with countries of origin and transit that include confronting traffickers and the root causes of migration. And on this basis, we must support a new, revised EU agreement with Turkey and do much more for the resolution of conflicts and protection of vulnerable groups. We must promote the UN Global Compact on Orderly Migration that we signed in 2018 and work for the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and we must support the European Pact on Asylum and Migration on the basis of European Parliament proposals, ensuring that in crisis situations there will be mandatory and proportionate relocation of asylum seekers to member states, ensuring that international protection status is guaranteed, as the case with Ukrainian refugees, ensuring safe legal migration paths to EU for a substantial number of refugees each year, ensuring a European mechanism for returns of migrants that are not granted asylum in Europe. This is the only way to confront this great challenge effectively and on the base of our values. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Socrates. The last speaker on the list is Valérie Boyer from France, and I ask you to listen carefully to her as well and to be a bit more quiet in respect of her speech. So Valérie, the floor is yours.
Merci Madame la Présidente, chers collègues. Un grand merci à nos hôtes arméniens pour la chaleur de leur accueil et l'organisation. C'est d'autant plus méritoire qu'ils nous reçoivent à un moment très douloureux de leur histoire qui en compte beaucoup trop. Ils accueillent dans la République d'Arménie, qui est une vraie démocratie, 120 000 Arméniens chassés par l'Azerbaïdjan de leurs terres ancestrales. L'Arménie était appelée autrefois le royaume des trois mers. Et après avoir vécu les pires tourments en Artsakh, l'Arménie est aujourd'hui menacée dans son intégrité territoriale, puisque récemment, l'Arménie a été qualifiée d'Azerbaïdjan occidental. Oui, vous avez bien entendu, mes chers collègues. Avec le précédent tragique ukrainien, nous voyons bien que ce genre de déclaration lourde de menaces peut entraîner le pire. Nous avons été et nous sommes toujours aux côtés des Ukrainiens, dont je voudrais saluer fraternellement le courage et l'engagement. Mais cet après-midi, nous parlons des minorités. Et je voudrais en parler d'une qui n'en est pas une, puisque ce sont les femmes dans les conflits. Après les Yézidis, les chrétiens d'Orient torturés par Daesh. Après Bouchta en Ukraine, qui nous a tous saisis d'effroi. Le martyr d'Anouch Apetian, violé, torturé, démembré en Artsakh. Nous avons été saisis d'horreur par les crimes du Hamas. Le Hamas a réservé aux femmes, aux fillettes, aux enfants, le pire et au-delà, une barbarie qui défie notre imagination. Le viol est une arme de guerre, arme maniée par les terroristes, et à ceux qui doutent, je les invite à visionner le film que ces barbares ont tourné, tellement ils étaient ivres de leur haine qui visait les Juifs parce que Juifs. Aujourd'hui, le poison de l'antisémitisme se répand de façon décomplexée sur toute la planète et dans des endroits qu'on n'aurait pas imaginé touchés par cette barbarie. La charte d'Helsinki nous réunit aujourd'hui et nous oblige. Détruire les femmes et les enfants, c'est empêcher l'avenir de notre humanité. L'abysse, la lie de l'humanité, ne peut être relativisée, réduite ou minimisée à une revendication territoriale qui justifierait ces barbaries, cette barbarie. Je vous remercie.
Merci Valérie. I will now give the floor to Gideris Surplice, and you have just 1 minute, Surplice.
Thank you, Madam. In reaction to what has been said, I would just like to draw your attention, dear colleagues, what instrumentalized migration is. So, it started after Lithuania and Poland supported the opposition of Belarus. After the fake elections of 2020, when the people were beaten on the streets just by calling for fair elections. These people who flew to Minsk from Asia, they flew with Turkish Airlines flights, Iraq Airlines flights, and the number of flights was increased into Belarus, invited by the authorities. Then they were brought by authorities of Belarus to the border of the EU and then pushed with the guns in their backs through the border of the EU. So this is what Belarus thinks of migration. And now I would just like to ask our colleagues to stop lying, because no matter how many times you repeat the lie, it's still a lie. No matter how many times you quote Shakespeare, you are still on the wrong side of history. And instead of lying, please free your political prisoners, which you still have 2,000, including the Nobel Prize winner Ales Beliatsky. Żyje Belarus!
Thank you. Next speaker, and I remind you that you just have 1 minute to intervene, will be Radoslav Fogiel from Poland.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm taking the floor because we've been seeing an attempt to tell utter and disgraceful lies by representative of an authoritarian Belarusian regime. It is a regime that lured people from Middle East, from Africa, to its country to wage a hybrid war, to create an artificial migrant crisis and wage a hybrid war against Poland, against Lithuania, against Latvia. And this is being said by against countries who accepted millions of Ukrainian refugees as a result of war started by the biggest Belarusian ally, Putin's Russia. So it's a disgrace that we've been hearing that, and I would like to use this opportunity to remind you all that we adopted a resolution regarding political prisoners in Belarus during our Vancouver session, and I appeal to do everything in our power to release those prisoners. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, and he will be the last, will be Mark Demesmaker from Belgium. I remind you that you have 1 minute.
Yes, well, I myself, I'm impressed by the speed by which the delegate from Belarus has studied the report I had mentioned just a few minutes earlier, calling it false. The report, the Yale report on the systematic deportation of Ukrainian children in a joint effort between Russia and Belarus, is extremely well documented. It identifies, it names the different individuals, organizations involved, the different facilities, the locations where children are deported to for re-education, including at least one facility for military training. It would be great, of course, if allegations are false, to allow independent international organizations to verify it. He didn't explain, by the way, why legislation was changed in order to allow children to be moved from occupied Ukraine without documented permission of their parents, and how that rhymes with his claim that children 6 to 17 years old are deported with everybody's consent. How did Alexander Solzhenitsyn say it once? We know that they are lying, they know that they are lying, they even know that we know that they are lying, but they keep on lying.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Before closing our session, I will ask our guest, Mr. Kyriakosian, to make some comments, very brief, very fast, but you have heard a lot of our interventions. What is the lessons learned for you?
Thank you very much. Of course, I was listening carefully to all the interventions, and which were covering different aspects relating to the rights protection of minorities in different spots of the world, relating to different conflicts, and of course that's quite worrying. I mentioned that in my speech, and I think there is a lot of talk now about the problem of international legal order that is not responding effectively or efficiently. I would say that it is though true, but I think it's those kind of comments should not be perceived in a way that to detach us from realities. In any way, I think countries should strive to apply and to use the international institutions that they are as now. They are, of course, they are not flawless, they are not perfect, but they are what we have. And that's what Armenia does now, because Armenia is heavily engaged with international courts and using international courts as a forum to bring the evidence and the issues and violations, evidence about violations by Azerbaijan, including the ICJ, including the ECHR. Now Armenia has also joined the ICC by ratifying the Rome Statute, also by recognizing the jurisdiction of the court retroactively, which we believe are important steps in terms of preventing those violations. We think that those are a very important component of the policy, foreign policy of Armenia. And in the end of the day, the countries are the responsible ones to enforce international law, not the institutions. Institutions are built by countries too. I mean, if the countries are not taking up responsibility of enforcing, then there is no point in talking about compliance with international legal standards. That's why, in the end of the day, all of the countries involved share some responsibility in one way or another. It means that somehow they might be affected by some violations or somehow involved in some conflict. So everyone has its own share of responsibility. That's my take from this. That's a very important thing. And the other take that I would very much would like to highlight, talks about the need to reform the international legal order should not detach us from the values of the international legal order, because the values are the same. I don't think that we need to change the value system. On the contrary, we need to reinforce this value system. We might need to revitalize the institution set to make it more effective application, but the value set created after the Second World War, that's the value set that we have. I don't think that we need to reinvent the wheel, it's there. The only thing we need to do is to while we're trying to enforce this, also try to cure the shortcomings of the system, which we need to do, of course. But for that, you need to have some stabilized political environment globally, stabilized geopolitical environment in order to achieve that goal. So that's the other take that I think I would highlight here. And there has been a lot of talk about the hate crimes and hate speech and animosity. Yeah, I think that's a real problem in the past decade or so. And that's not surprising, by the way, that the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination has been used as a tool to bring cases by many countries, starting from 2008 by Georgia, then Qatar versus UAE, then Ukraine versus Russia, then Armenia versus Azerbaijan. So this speaks about something. It speaks about the needs of the tolerance, needs of the inclusive societies that has been mentioned by many delegates in their speeches. So those are the main lessons learned and takeaways maybe. Thank you very much. Thank you for your
so much, Mr. Kyriakosian. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, and I would like to have more time to discuss this. But dear colleagues, I thank you for this fruitful discussion, and I I pass it on to our President, Pia Kauma, for her conclusion and closing remarks. Thank you for your patience. Yeah.
Dear colleagues, thank you for your active participation in our debates today and yesterday. As we conclude our autumn meeting, let me give the floor to our dear friend Sarkis Kandanian for some remarks.
Madam President, dear colleagues, once again I want to express my gratitude for your precious presence in Armenia. For the last 2 days, we had very timely and important discussions on the internal and external threats and deteriorating security situation in the OSCE region. We spoke about our common challenges that are shaking the stability of the region, about internal threats such as corruption, and about the necessity to strengthen the resilience towards those threats. And of course, we talked about people who suffer the most and to whom we are accountable to, because at the end of the day, it's about people. Every time when we gather in this parliamentary platform at the end, we express hope that the next time when we get together again, we will find ourselves in a better shape, in a more stable and peaceful OSCE region. However, it seems that the hope is not enough. Expressing reactions towards what's going on is not enough. We need to take stronger actions to win this battle. The gates of democracy are shaken, internally and externally. Those who are fighting at those gates must be supported stronger than ever before. Those who are shaking those gates must be punished in the strongest term. They cannot win this fight. At the end, dear colleagues, let me express a few words of gratitude to those who made it possible for us to get here together. Madam President, first of all, thank you again for your commitment and for your work. Secretary General, thank you very much, and the International Secretariat for the guidance in these past few months that made this all possible. I want to thank the staff of the National Assembly of Armenia, devoted, smart civil servants who helped to organize this event under the leadership of Chief of Staff David Arakelian. I want to thank also all the volunteers who were helping us to organize this. And of course, I want to thank my delegation, and particularly one person, without whom it wouldn't be possible, I assure, to have all of us together, Secretary of our delegation, Mariam. Last but not least, I want also to thank the government of Armenia for very important support. But this is not the end. We still will have very important discussions tomorrow for the Mediterranean Forum. And I wish you all pleasant stay in Armenia and safe travels back home. Thank you.
Thank you, Sargis, for your personal efforts in making sure that the OSCPA would be able to meet for this autumn meeting. We deeply appreciate it. I would now like to invite Secretary General Roberto Montella to say a few words.
Thank you very much. I'll try to do it in 4 minutes, as I was told. These were 2 great days. I think we did a great job here. Congratulations to all of you. Again, my gratitude to the Armenian delegation for putting this together, to Gustavo in our secretariat and the conference team, and to the interpreters, of course, my colleagues, I'm also an interpreter, who have helped us communicate during these days. And Mariam, I know you've been the person who has actually put this into practice. As you said, Sargis, the best is yet to come. It's not over. We have dinner tonight. Tomorrow we have still another session, and we'll have a cultural program. So we look forward for doing this. We have provided here a good opportunity to have a debate on the major issues that are now on the security agenda. Of course, the war of aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine, the situation in the Middle East, and of course, probably some, I would say again, positive or optimistic news that we get here also from the tour that Madam President made in this region between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and we hope that in the next weeks, hopefully, or not months, we will get some good news on signing of a peace treaty between the 2 countries, and this would be very good for the people of this region. But I say also the debates that you've made are very good for the people that you represent. Never forget that this assembly represents 1 billion citizens of the OSCE regions from Vancouver to Vladivostok. We do not pass resolution at these meetings. We do not pass a communiqué. But I think the discussions that you've had also will inform the discussions that the ministers will have in the next 10 days in Skopje, the OSCE Ministerial Council meeting. The OSCE is indeed in what I would call an existential crisis. There is a very big difficulties because, of course, the organization works by consensus. So you need all the countries to agree on any decisions, the budget, the future chair, the heads of institutions of the organization who are coming to an end of their mandates. So it will be very difficult to find consensus on all these issues. I hope that the ministers will take good advice also from their, let's say, representatives here, and hopefully come to at least some minimum common denominator which will allow this organization to functionally work for next year, and then in 2025 we will have the Finnish chairmanship, and we will hopefully from that moment onwards, hopefully also with the end of some of the big tragedies that we are experiencing today, have a better future from 2025. Of course, we will meet again in Skopje for the members of the Bureau, and in Vienna for our winter meeting, and I look forward to working with you also towards the annual session in Bucharest. And of course there will be a lot of election observation missions in between, starting in December with the election observation mission in Belgrade, and I'm told that already almost 84 members have signed up, and probably the count will go up. So thank you very much for your commitment, for your work, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow and in the next days. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto. You did it in 3 minutes. Dear Roberto, dear Sargis, dear colleagues, let me begin by thanking all of you for your strong engagement in our autumn meeting. Our time together has been brief, but our debates have been very interesting. I truly appreciate that you have taken the time to come all the way to Armenia this weekend to support and defend the OSCE. Our discussions over the past 2 days have made it very clear that the OSCE has strong advocates throughout our region. But today, we are all worried. We are tired of the organization's rules being abused. We are concerned that no budget has been adopted for over 2 years. We regret that the OSCE's field presence keeps on shrinking. The present situation is not acceptable. All this is clear. I will relay your various serious concerns directly to the foreign ministers who will gather in Skopje in a couple of weeks. But what has also been made very clear in our discussions is that our assembly is not paralyzed. It is alive and kicking, and I'm proud of it. Our assembly continues to meet. Our members continue to observe elections. Our debates continue to produce very strong political documents. We need to remember this. Being the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE doesn't mean that we have to replicate the disagreements that we see in Vienna. We don't need to stoop down to that level. We need to remain positive so that we can remain influential. I do not think that there is a more relevant place to say this than in Armenia. For 3 decades, the OSCE has provided a mechanism to search for sustainable peace. But today, we are faced with new security realities. But as you have heard from our hosts yesterday, and as I discussed in Baku earlier this week, now is the time for peace. Both countries seem to be ready for this. But they need us, the international community, to accompany them towards a long-awaited peace agreement. Our mission is simple. We need to encourage parliamentarians to add their voice to the peace efforts. We need to continue offering this unique platform to contribute towards this. And rather than remaining spectators, we must actively contribute to confidence building. I am confident that despite all the problems in Vienna, our assembly can play this role. Your strong engagement proves it. Before I conclude, let me once again thank our hosts and the International Secretariat for organizing this meeting. Thank you to the National Assembly of Armenia. Thank you to all the staff. Let's give them a round of applause. See you later this evening at dinner, and we will meet tomorrow again in the morning for our Mediterranean Forum. Until then, I declare this conference closed. Thank you.